and to serve in a combat unit.
Because when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, I took it personal. Everyone I knew was on fire.
Good to see you, Gordon.
With over 22.6 million followers, Nigel is best known as his alter ego, Malaysian food critic Uncle Roger.
3 tablespoons of soy sauce.
3 tablespoons, and then he poured half the bottle. Hiya.
Notorious for his no-holds-barred approach, even the world's most famous chef isn't safe from his devastating reviews.
Remember niece and nephew? Gordon nailed his egg fried rice. He get called Uncle Gordon, but then he fucked up ramen, so Uncle Roger take that title away from him.
About a year ago, I was crowned Uncle Ramsay. You then kicked me in the nuts and took my crown away from me. What do I need to do to get my crown back?
You gotta make a good Asian dish. You messed up ramen. Come on, man.
For the amount of time you've spent in the UK now, I've spent more time in Indonesia than you ever have done. See how many woks I've got?
How many?
73.
Then why don't you use them in your ramen video? Good to see you, Gordon.
With over 22.6 million followers,
You have no idea how rare videos like this are. This is a sperm whale with a recently hunted giant squid in its mouth with a tentacle hanging off of it. Sperm whales are the largest toothed whales, and they can dive upwards of 2,000 meters and stay down for as much as an hour to hunt, well, their favorite food. One of the reasons that we knew giant squids were really a thing was because of all of the bits and pieces of the squid we would find inside of sperm whales, including their beaks. This obviously has never been recorded, so we can only guess what happens down there, but that's about it. The thing is, they're both huge. Giant squids are known to get at least 45 feet, some estimate up to 60 feet. Up until recently, there had only been dead squid found, but recently we have found a few videos of live giant squid. And male sperm whales can get upwards of 60 feet, so it truly is a battle of the giants. And they're called sperm whales because of waxy substance found in their head.
Holy shit, look at that. This is crazy. Huge sheet of water, 300 to 400 feet deep. It's rushing over, it begins to just strip away the rock. This cataract complex is about 5 miles across, and you can see what it's done to the bedrock. We're on the rock blade right there.
The story begins on the still mysterious continent of Terranor. In a huge castle, the story begins on the still mysterious continent of Terranor. Rain fell continuously, knocking on the windows of this mighty castle and flooding everything around. This other world was very different from the familiar Earth. And when the ruler of this mysterious world becomes inflamed with an idea, in the rush of which he will lose his heart, a being will appear on these lands over whom the fate of this world has no power. A legend that originates in the long-forgotten antiquity of the mysterious Turator, which has an equally mysterious name: creatures from another world. The lord of the unknown Lusclan Empire committed a very vile and inhuman act, trying to achieve his vile desired goal. He sacrificed 5 of his sons, 7 daughters, and 19 relatives close to him in an attempt to summon a powerful god from another world. After completing this immoral summoning ritual, the air began to noticeably distort. The space around him began to play with some strange blue colors. A creature from another world appeared in front of him, but not as he expected. The Lord asked with disbelief if it was true, and this was the very creature from the legend. Despair and violent anger descended on Vladika. He shouted that all this turned out to be a waste of time. For his lost time he received such a worthless creature. The ritual performed did not meet expectations and called an ordinary boy of 10 years old from Earth into the world. As a result of anger, the emperor ordered him to be removed from his sight. Only after arriving in this completely new and mysterious world for him, he was thrown out. Luskan's castle had been in disrepair for a long time. The once beautiful and majestic walls were covered with ugly cracks and stains of someone's blood. It seems that it was impossible to find a single living place. The distraught lord stood in the heavy rain and fiercely prayed that a creature from another world would hear his desperate call. Vladika's eyes, which had been expressionless for a long time, were opened so much that it seemed as if the eyes would soon roll out of their sockets. The clothes of the once neat and statuesque Vladika were covered in blood. Huge and scary to the core, the snake majestically and menacingly waged its forced battle. Its eyes burned with bright yellow fire, and its snarl exposed huge and razor-sharp teeth and a long tongue. The unknown knight standing next to her seemed like a bug compared to her. The swordsman prepared for the attack, confidently grasping the sword. During his attack, his eyes and the space distorted nearby lit up with blue flames. Having carried out its truly strong blow, which was called the art of shaking the heavens, shaking the mountain, the powerful and majestic snake was cut in half like a small worm, and the air around was shaken by a bright blue wave of recoil. Seeing the strong and terrible monster summoned by him was defeated with such amazing ease, the Lord was horrified. His eyes, burning with bright yellow flames, expressed confusion and fear of the unknown swordsman. The master could not believe his own eyes and shouted furiously that the reason why the summoned creatures are so dangerous is that the laws of this world have no power over them. Already climbing the steps that gave away the Lord and the unknown swordsman, the swordsman replied that this also applies to him. Climbing the steps and proudly presenting himself in all his glory before the Lord, the swordsman put his naked sword in front of him and explained that he, too, was one of those beings whom the Lord had called into this world. He is a savior from another world, son Shihan. The swordsman began his righteous speech, saying in an inspired voice that the powerful ancestral magic, passed down from generation to generation only within the narrow circles of the powerful Luskan Empire, the ability to summon beings from other worlds. Realizing that the final was inevitable, Vladika got down on one knee and breathed heavily. His proud disposition was very angry that he was so helpless in this situation. The swordsman continued to bring the righteous light with his speech, saying that a huge number of people were killed for the sake of this powerful force. Even more had to suffer under the oppression of tyranny. Vladika leaned his back against the cracked wall of the once majestic castle and listened in silence from despair to the speech of the swordsman he already knew. The swordsman said he went through 7 circles of hell because of him. In the memories of the swordsman, an unpleasant picture surfaced of him sitting behind bars in a cold cell, chained up. When he was called into this world, called by the Lord, he had nothing, and he was still thrown away like some kind of garbage. Another picture surfaced in the swordsman's memories, giving him the very hope he needed so much, how he barely escaped from this cursed place, and now, after 3 long years, he returned. The swordsman raised his righteous sword over the head of the Lord sitting on the ground. The sword sparkled with blue colors again. The swordsman told how he lived a living hell day after day, tempering his sword in the desire for revenge and waiting for this very day. Today the tyranny of the king of Lustenad will end. The swordsman prepared for his crushing blow. Raising his sword higher, the space seemed to shake and explode from the saturation of blue lightning. The swordsman's eyes burned with a bright yellow flame of anger. This is the rage and pain of all his friends who were exterminated by the king. Shouting furiously that he would reward the king with them in full, the swordsman put every bit of his strength and anger into his blow. The air whistled, and a bright blue light remained in the places in space where the sword slipped. King Lustan desperately shouted that it was all a curse, it was all that hateful prophecy. The echo of his plaintive cry echoed through the twisted walls of his once mighty castle. The strongest blow of the swordsman, sparking, went through the king's chest. Blood immediately gushed out of his mouth in a strong stream. The bright blue eyes of the swordsman immediately realized that King Lustan was definitely dead. The particles of blue light were still dissolving in space. With one light movement of his hand, the swordsman drove his righteous sword back into its scabbard. After examining the bleeding corpse of his most hated enemy, the swordsman said with relief that it was over and exhaled wearily. Confident footsteps began to be heard behind Shihan, who was getting closer. Approaching some short distance, a female angelic voice called out to him. The voice was so beautiful that Shihan's heart was filled with tenderness. Having found out whose this cute voice was, Shihan turned around. His eyes lit up with love, and his gaze expressed the most sincere joy. With joy in his voice, he shouted out the girl's name, Levin. A girl with the sweetest and angelic appearance appeared before his eyes. Levina happily waved her hand, greeting Shihan. With tenderness in her voice, she said that finally, after so much time, he was able to win. With a little embarrassment on her face, she sincerely congratulated him. Shihan agreed with her that it was a very long battle. Inspired by joy and warm feelings, They strode to each other and gently shackled each other with hugs. Sheehan held her so tightly, as if for the last time. Sheehan leaned into Levena's ear and in a low voice filled with tenderness, said that now it was over, now she didn't need to worry about anything and that he would make sure that she was always happy. Levena, genuinely happy with such warm words from her lover, wanted to add something. A blush appeared on her face, but she only managed to gently pronounce his name as someone's calm female voice interrupted her. Wilston was sitting on one knee opposite the lifeless bodies of the defeated king. She said that this was not the end yet, and in order to rid this world of the remaining monsters that the king had summoned, they needed to burn his heart. Wilston turned slightly to face Sheehan. Her delicate and snow-white skin sparkled with pleasant highlights. She was also endowed with a cute appearance. In an enthusiastic and charming voice, she praised Sheehan, saying that it seemed to her that someone like him would never defeat the king, but admitted that Sheehan's strength was truly incredible. Sheehan was very surprised to hear such words from Wilston. He wanted to say something, but having only managed to exclaim her name, he was interrupted by someone's male voice, who sincerely rejoiced at Sheehan's victory over the king. Another group of people entered the hall of this castle, who, sincerely rejoicing at the victory, began to discuss that if they burned the king's heart, would Sheehan disappear. But Sheehan was called into this world not by the king's heart, but by his relative with the help of hearts. A voice exclaimed that the king himself had called his death into this world, and laughed. Sheehan, being sincerely glad that all his friends came here and congratulated him, he interrupted the conversation of friends with an enthusiastic voice, calling them to listen. Levena tightly, because of all her strength, squeezed Sheehan's strong shoulders with her hands. Looking deeply into his eyes, she asked in a voice trembling with excitement if he really did not want to return home. Sheehan confidently replied that yes. He had already decided everything for himself a long time ago. Sheehan, in his joyful voice, continued to say that those who fought with him shoulder to shoulder, those who put their lives on the line. From the words of his beloved friend, the enthusiastic friends lit up sincere smiles. Looking in the direction of Wilston, who was lighting a fire, he continued that he would always be able to rely on friends. Wilston gave him a surprised look, and finally, looking at his beloved Levena, he continued that the beloved person with whom he wants to be for the rest of his life. Levena looked at him confusedly. A joyful and sweet smile lit up on Sheehan's face. He would be lying now if he said that he did not miss his native land, but he does not regret at all that he chose this particular world. Enthusiastically beating his hand on his armor on his chest, Sheehan looked around with his pure eyes at all those present and said in a joyful voice that all that was important to him was to be right here in this world, next to all of them. Not all of his friends had smiles on their faces, but certainly their souls were warmed by warmth. The long-haired guy exclaimed that it seemed that Sheehan had decided on everything. Looking at him in response with joyful eyes, Sheehan exclaimed that this was for sure. Shahana called Levin in a charming and very confused voice. He turned to her as she took a step forward, wrapped her gentle arms around him and kissed him sensually. Both of them were very confused by such a turn of events that it seemed to them like an eternity had flown by. When this tender and sensual kiss ended, they looked at each other with their loving eyes. Sheehan exclaimed the name of his beloved in embarrassment, when suddenly her sweet, embarrassed look was replaced by a disgusting and cunning smile. A voice was heard from behind saying that it would give them trouble. Genuinely not understanding what was happening now, Sheehan looked into Levine's face with incomprehension, as if waiting for an explanation. Then, behind Sheehan's back, the air was forcefully dispersed. The space began to violently distort and flooded with blue flames. Not believing what was happening, Sheehan turned and looked into the abyss with fear. Sheehan saw a huge portal open in the air. He screamed, warning his friends about it and asked them to be careful. Not believing that all this was happening again, he furiously shouted that someone had opened the portal. But when he turned around, he was horrified. He saw his friends standing with disgustingly haughty faces. In Wilston's hand, the ashes of the king burned with a scarlet flame. Sheehan asked loudly if it was the king's heart. Wilston asked in a haughty voice if Sheehan knew that even if all the nobility of Lusclan were dead, if they had access to at least the ashes, they could open a rift between dimensions. Hearing this, Sheehan was horrified. Wilston stood and held her hand with fire in front of her. Her gaze, which had once been happy for Sheehan, now expressed nothing. She said with disdain that he had become too strong. The others supported Wilston. They said that Sheehan was taking all the attention, all the love, and that at this rate he would take the place of the king, and they did not need another tyrant. Sheehan, who had not expected such a huge meanness, stood in a daze. And now people who were strangers to him said that he was certainly the savior of this world, and they were grateful to him for this, and therefore they were returning him to their world. And they would continue to decide the fate of this world, realizing that everything was a big hoax. Sheehan loudly and furiously asked what they were carrying. He looked at his beloved, standing on the sidelines no longer the same as before. In the hope, he screamed and asked her to help him, but Levena interrupted him. Exhaling, she uttered his name in a completely different voice. Something broke inside Sheehan. Levena's face changed to a smug and cunning voice. Already disgusting for him, she said that he could have made the right choice himself. Sheehan's heart was split. His adored bride betrayed him in the last possible way. Unable to believe what was happening to him now, he exclaimed the name of his beloved bride with bewilderment and fear, with the same disgusted face from arrogance. Lavanna apologized and said that becoming the king's wife was not part of her plans and she would be the queen. She added that she does not want to be prey for a man, but wants to be a woman who takes everything she wants, including men. She went to Shehan's face and lifted it with her finger. Looking into it with her empty eyes, she said that he was the man who could not be her trophy. Falling to the floor, Shehan desperately asked what kind of nonsense Levin was talking about. Grinning, Lavanna said with contempt that it still seemed difficult for Shehan to accept what was happening, so she would ease his suffering. Shehan, realizing that there was nothing he could do about it, desperately shouted for her to wait. But Lavanna came closer to him and pushed him lightly. Shehan began to fall into the abyss of the portal. Lavanna told him goodbye, that her love would return to where it came from. The others silently bent over the portal. Shehan shouted furiously, and the portal closed. This world was saved by 6 heroes and an alien from another world. He fulfilled his purpose for which he was called to this world, and they promised people to bring them a new future, because this is what Song Shehan really wanted. Rilstein stood surrounded by the other heroes on a high tower and told the people that the times of the tyranny of the king had come to an end, and they, the 6 heroes, would become the pillars of the new world, marking the beginning of the era of the 6 kingdoms. The people shouted enthusiastically and joyfully. Cruel taxes were abolished. People were freed from slave labor. The 6 kingdoms worked side by side, ruling the continent of Terranor with all wisdom and mercy. It was a time of peace and prosperity. The portal, sparkling with blue flames, reopened. At the foot of a high and majestic mountain, in a mighty and rich coniferous forest, there is an ordinary peasant's house. It is not large in size and not rich in utensils, next to a small vegetable garden, fenced. Despite the frail appearance, the house was very cozy. An ordinary peasant girl came out of the house. She was carrying a wicker basket in her hands and was thinking hard about something. Her beautiful brown hair was tied in a neat bow. She exclaimed joyfully that the sky was clear again today and there was not a single cloud. She happily looked at the beautiful sky and wiped her pretty face with her hand. She again exclaimed that the weather today is very suitable to work in the field. She sat down by the beds and began to do business, when suddenly she noticed something. The girl looked away in surprise. She saw a fish lying in the grass. Not believing her eyes, she walked over and picked it up. After examining the fish, she exclaimed joyfully that it was a flounder, fresh and alive. Anticipating a delicious dinner, he said that it was very tasty. Suddenly she realized that something was wrong. How could she eat fish without knowing where it came from? And even more so, how fresh fish ended up in the depths of the forest. The girl decided that it was too suspicious. She put the fish in place and decided that it would be better to go and continue working in the field. Carelessly, she walked back to her field. Moving away from the fish for a few meters, a loud explosion thundered behind her, the clap from which echoed throughout the forest. The girl turned around in horror and prepared to defend herself. On the ground, covered with cracks from the explosion, where the fish was lying, there was now a pig. The girl raised her beautiful eyes to the sky in surprise and began to reason about what happened to the sky. First slaves, now a pig. Gazing at the sky, she became confused and could not say a word. She had just seen a man, it was Shehan, completely naked, who was falling down from the sky. He was terrified because he was flying upside down, waving his arms and legs and screaming very loudly. The girl did not understand the hint of the sky and made an incomprehensible face. Shehan fell to the ground with a crash, dust rose around him, and pieces of earth scattered around the place of an unpleasant landing. The girl was still in shock. Looking at the naked body of Shehan, who stuck his head on the ground, she became even more confused. She asked the sky with incomprehension why there was a naked man after the pig. She went to check on him to make sure he was alive, when suddenly, he took out his head and began to look around with incomprehension, and the girl was even more horrified by what was happening. Shehan began to look around to understand where his difficult fate had brought him. He looked with interest at the forest, then at the house. The girl gasped in surprise. She decided to talk to him and greeted him uncertainly. Shehan made a smug smile, baring his snow-white teeth. He got up with a frenzied laugh and began shouting that he was here, that he had done it and how much time it had taken him. He fairly shouted that he was back. From the outside, he looked like a psycho, completely unashamed of his naked body. Suddenly he fell forward. Shehan fell to the ground face down and did not make any signs of consciousness in him. The girl, who was already holding a self-defense weapon in her hand, looked at him with confusion and asked uncertainly what it was. It was a warm night. It was light outside, because of the bright moon illuminating everything. Shehan abruptly opened his eyes and turned his head to look around. He did not understand where he was. He was in a warm and soft bed, carefully covered with a blanket in some cozy room. Surprised, Shehan wanted to say something, but the girl who entered the room said, "Did he really wake up already?" She was holding a tray of food in her hands and said she had taken some hot porridge. The girl asked if he was feeling well. It was very strange to watch a man falling from the sky. Shehan, asking if she had saved him, wanted to get out of bed quickly, but the pain shackled his body and he, restraining the pain, made an unpleasant chuckle. He began to reason, stretching his shoulder, that the effects were worse than he thought. Did his calculations turn out to be wrong? The girl watching from the side noticed that he was speaking a different language. She began to reason that he speaks a language not used in Terraner. The fact that he speaks another language instead of Austin indicates that he is from a primitive tribe, but he is too pure for a primitive one. Seeing that the girl was confused by the fact that she could not understand his speech, Sheehan remembered that he was not on Earth, but in Terraner, and he should have spoken in the Austin language used here. Sheehan asked, already in Austin's language, if she was the one who saved him, putting a tray of fragrant porridge on the locker. The girl replied confusedly that it was she who came to the conclusion that he was not from a primitive tribe. Sheehan thoughtfully asked where he was. The girl began to explain that they were in the north of Mount Defilion, about noon from the village of Koran. Sheehan asked her in surprise what kind of mountain Defilion was and what kind of village Koran was. The girl came closer to him and said that she would first explain the territory. She continued that they were in the kingdom of Rilstein, which was formed after the revolution of the Seven Heroes. Hearing the name, Sheehan realized something. Sheehan's face and voice changed, and he spoke the name of the country thoughtfully. Sheehan raised his hands to his lips and said in a dissatisfied voice that Rilstein was really the king now. This traitor. From the outside, he looked strange and crazy. Sheehan asked the girl that he would like to borrow some clothes before the offer, because he had been without her for a while, burning with shame for his manners. The girl answered him positively in a detached manner. Sheehan has already eaten 2 plates of fragrant porridge and has already started on the 3rd. He ate very quickly, ignoring all manners of decency. Sheehan commented on the food, saying that the fishy smell would not help her and that the spices in this village seemed to be very expensive. Sheehan went on to say that he finally feels his return. Noticing the surprised and shocking look of the girl, Sheehan exclaimed that he was ungrateful and thanked her for the food. The girl looked at Sheehan with surprise, enjoying the fragrant porridge, and analyzed everything in her head. She noticed that her strange guest has a trained body, without a drop of fat and a very clean face, as well as rude manners too. She wondered if her guest was a member of the royal family. But why he was without clothes then, it was difficult to find an answer. Sheehan at this time continued to enjoy the food, sometimes even eating without a spoon. After finishing the next portion of porridge, Sheehan exhaled contentedly and said that he only now realized that he had not asked the name of his savior. He asked who she was. The girl exclaimed in her head that why was he asking this just now? The girl sitting at the table opposite, closing her eyes, decided to introduce herself after all. She pointed to herself and said that her name was Alida and, apparently, she was an ordinary village girl. Sheehan gasped and asked in surprise if this was really the case. He asked in surprise that this is really how swordsmen are treated now, because Alida also looks well trained. Alida had a displeased expression on her face, and she asked how he found out about it. Sheehan explained that it was probably a feeling of instinct. Dissatisfied with being discovered, she agreed that she was a swordsman and explained that free swordsmen who do not have a king to serve are technically unemployed. In her case, she just needs to take care of the field until nothing needs to be done. Hearing the answer, Sheehan noticeably lowered his tone and said that now he had another question. He asked what her relationship with King Rustenad was. Alida, who had not expected such a question, was horrified and looked back with a strange smile. Suddenly, the chair overturns and Sheehan falls to the floor. Alida is ahead of the curve. Until Sheehan gets up, she is already rushing to him with a small knife in her hands. Her face and eyes express complete determination to nail him. She jumps over the table and stops. He has disappeared. Where he should be lying, he is not there. Sheehan stands behind her and resolutely holds a wooden spoon. He says that he did not ask this in order to start a fight. The girl, who is in shock, quickly turns around and screams, "How did he get there?" Strikes. Sheehan put his hands on his belt and with a haughty look just tilts his head to the side. The blow passes by. Alida flies by Mayim, turns around and prepares for the next blow. Because Sheehan dodged, she makes a guess that he is also a swordsman. She quickly begins to strike a lot of blows, and Sheehan calmly evades them, saying that he has no intentions of fighting with her and asks her to talk to him. Alida, seeing that all her blows do not reach the target, concludes that he is strong and decides to be even faster. The speed of her attacks increases noticeably, so much so that she quickly disappears from sight and ends up behind Sheehan. Sheehan, amazed by Alida's strength and speed, says with a smile on his face that she was not calm, but still, she has a kind heart. At this time, Alida is already moving fast with a kick to the back of Sheehan. Sheehan knew she was in the back. He quickly turns away and puts a wooden spoon in front of his shoulder. The tip of Alida's knife hits it. Sheehan asks that since she is aiming at his shoulders, it means she doesn't want to kill him. Seeing that the blow was deflected with a wooden spoon, Alida is shocked. From an unsuccessful attempt to punch the spoon, Alida fell to the floor. Nothing happened from a knife strike on an ordinary wooden spoon. There were no signs of damage on the spoon. It emitted some kind of magical glow in Sheehan's hands. She, who was shocked by Sheehan's strength, continued to lie on the floor. In a surprised voice she said that she had lost and asked what kind of person he was. Sheehan gave his full name in a proud voice and added that he was from Earth. Hearing Shehan's name, Alita was even more horrified. She repeated his name in a trembling voice and asked if he was a foreigner, the savior of the Songshikans. Shehan grinned and said it looked like he hadn't been forgotten after all. Looking at Alita sitting on the floor, Shehan explained that he understands why she attacked him, but he asked just out of curiosity and therefore, if she doesn't want to, she cannot answer. The girl said in a strangled voice that her full name was Alita Bella Rustanad Rusklin. She turned out to be the daughter of the king of Rustanad. When King Rustanad was overthrown and Shehan was sent back to Earth, the new rulers ordered to kill all the blood relatives of the tyrant king. They could not allow the appearance of a new tyrant king. Armed men broke into the majestic castle of the former king. Seraphina, who was Alita's mother, was lying on the floor in blood and saying goodbye to her daughter. She asked Karen for forgiveness, but she had no one else to rely on. Karen promised her that he would protect her child. He put his life and honor on the line. Alita began to remember her childhood time. A pleasant picture surfaced in her head, how Karen was rolling her on his shoulders. She said that Karen was her bodyguard, that he raised her away from people and taught her how to hold a sword in her hands. Next, Alita had an unpleasant picture in which Karen, wounded, was sitting against the wall, and knights were approaching him. She kept saying that Karen was just doing his thing and more, but when her identity was inadvertently revealed, he had to take her away from the kingdom. Concluding her story, Alita sat with a sad face, summing up that since then they had to live here alone, except that they sometimes went to the neighboring town to take an order when the money ran out. Shehan, who was sitting quietly at the table, after listening to the story, understood why she lived here alone. Already with a slightly menacing look, Shehan raised his finger and said that he did not think that she was the daughter of a tyrant king, and it turns out that he was her father's enemy. Alita, exhaling, hastened to say that she had no feelings for the tyrant emperor. Already with an indifferent face, Alita said that the tyrant emperor was dead, but people were still afraid that someone would take his place. Members of the imperial family could open portals, so they were hunted, and she thought that Shehan was one of the killers. Angrily, Shehan tightly squeezed the mug in his hand. He said that the guys thought that he would persecute the relatives of the tyrant emperor, but they were too lazy to convince him and they decided to betray him. The more Shehan found out, the angrier he got. Let's decide to read a little morality and seem like the right person. Shehan said in a peculiar voice that he understands that these are difficult things for Alita. He said that compared to local people, people who have fallen off the ground are good guys. Alita, feeling Spanish shame, asked if he was definitely from another world, because she had heard that after the victory, the hero returned back to Earth. She also asked how he got back to Terraner and why he came back naked. Shehan immediately felt ashamed of this oversight. He abruptly got up from the table and, trying to justify himself, shouted that it was not in his will. This is because only a living organism can pass through the portal, and not because he has any preferences. Recalling all these shameful events, Shehan confusedly said that he was naked when he came to this world earlier and even when he returned back to Earth 10 years ago. In the center of the Guanghwamat intersection, he clutched his head because it was bad for him to think about it. Alita was in shock. Alita asked that if he returned to Earth 10 years ago, then it turns out that he was again called by someone to Terraner. She couldn't believe that someone had summoned a person from another world, because only members of the imperial family are capable of such a thing. Crossing his arms over his chest, Shehan said that if you think about it that way, it was him, he called himself here. Alita was shocked and asked in a surprised voice if it was even possible to summon herself. Shehan said it was possible, but it wasn't easy and took 10 years. He began to reason how it could be explained. If he called himself, then it must have suddenly come to him an unpleasant realization of what was happening, and his eyes widened from this fact. Alita, noticing this, asked with interest what was the matter. Shehan turned to Alita and asked that she was being hunted. The reason probably lies in the fact that the Emperor's blood flows in her, allowing her to summon creatures from another world. Alita confirmed what Shehan had said. Shehan was horrified because of another of his mistakes. He said that he had made a mistake. Not understanding what it was about, Alita looked back with interest and waited for an explanation. Shehan said that in order to get to Terraner from Earth, you definitely need pointers of the magical dimension. Shehan, looking at Alita, continued, saying that he used the coordinates where there are pureblood relatives of Ruslan who have the power of summoning. He informed her that she was the only one who possessed the purest blood of Ruslan. Hearing this, Alita understood why Shehan was asking about her attitude to the tyrant emperor. Shehan averted his eyes and shamefacedly rubbing his back said that, in general, he used her as an interrupter to come into this world. Shehan summed up that this means that other magicians will see that Alita summoned him with summoning magic. Hearing this, Alita was horrified and jumped off the chair. Her eyes widened with fear, and a drop of sweat ran down her cheek. In fear for her quiet life, Alita quickly got up from the table and ran to the window. She looked anxiously out of the window, and her hope of maintaining a quiet life collapsed. She saw a lot of lights moving in the forest. Alita couldn't believe it had happened so quickly. A crowd of royal knights came out of the forest and stopped in front of Alita's little house. The magician who led them on the magic trail said that traces of magic are everywhere here and he is sure that all this magic comes from that house. A knight of the highest Genon came out of the crowd. The knight thanked the clan mage for his efforts and shouted in the bass voice of a real commander to his troops so that they would all immediately prepare for battle and surround Alita's house. At this time, in the house, Shihan watched Alita preparing to defend her life. She put on more comfortable clothes and took her sword. She looked very determined, as if she was not a bit afraid of a whole squad of knights in the courtyard. Shihan stood and felt guilty. He thought that she seemed to be preparing for such an occasion. He felt so sorry for her because he came here just because he wanted to. Shihan's imagination was playing with the worst outcome. He imagined that she had been hiding for so long, but was caught through his fault, because he came without asking her. Shihan thought that even if Alita didn't show her feeling, she was definitely very angry with him. Shihan called out to Alita, who was rushing in the process of preparation. She turned her attention to him, and he apologetically said that if she had something to say to him, she could speak freely. Alita didn't understand what he was talking about and looked at him in surprise. To Shihan's great surprise, Alita didn't hold a grudge against him. She stood in front of him and bowed, saying that she was grateful to him for warning her about the coming attack. Shihan was distraught. The commander-in-chief of the detachment, standing in front of the house, shouted for the sinner to show herself, otherwise he would blow up the whole house. He ordered the clan mage to start with a small attack. The magician replied that he understood. The magician put his hands in front of him and a flame of fire poured out of his hands. Shouting the name of the spell, he directed it towards the house. The house and the small area around immediately burst into an all-consuming fire. The commander was confused by what he saw, because he ordered to make a small demonstration attack, and before his eyes there was a huge column of fire that burned everything inside itself. The commander-in-chief asked if it was too much because they planned to take her alive. The clan mage replied that this spell just looks so strong, in fact it won't kill her. The knight stood in shock and confusion from such a fiery spell that engulfed the whole house in flames. They were worried for Alita that if he was careless, he might get burned. Alita suddenly ran out of the house. She was running fast and preparing for an attack. The knights enthusiastically ran at her, shouting that she was out. Some knight shouted that he would give 10 gold pieces to anyone who could capture her alive. Alita began to cut down the knights who were running at her with her sword. Seeing how Alita dealt with their comrades, the knights were shocked and horrified that she turned out to be a swordsman. Alita was already tired of waving weapons. There were too many knights, and she was trying to figure out how to escape. In front of Alita, an explosion burning with blue flames suddenly sounds. The earth and dust fly in different directions. Alita does not have time to react, and the blast wave throws her back with unimaginable force. She manages to land correctly and looks at the owner of such great strength. A knight holding a sword burning with a blue glow in his hands angrily says that Ruslan's blood is cursed and how a knight can kill soldiers. He asks if she is ashamed. The knight raises his sword in front of him. The space around him is distorted by a blue glow, and he and his sword burn with the same light. He says that now he is a knight of Genon, he will deal with her. Goosebumps and fear run through Alita's body. The power is even in Genon's armor. He is stronger than her by 1 level. Genon attacks her. Alita barely dodges. The blade of the sword sweeps past her neck, then she lunges and dodges again. Genon is really very fast. Making a lunge, Alita realizes that this is her chance to hit Genon. She resolutely stabs him in the stomach, but the magic armor reflects the blow and Alita feels a strong pain that rolled from her hand to her heels. Genon says that the strength of Alita's sword is very good, but nevertheless, his defense is much stronger. Genon, having prepared himself, strikes a crushing blow and says that such tricks will not work with him. Alita tries to deflect the blow with her sword, but an unimaginable force takes her down. Blood escapes from her mouth. With a strangled grunt, Alita flies back and falls to the ground. She can't hold the sword in her hands, and it falls a couple of meters away from her. Alita's blood gets on Genon's cheek. Noticing this, he begins to wipe his face with his hand in disgust. Alita, sitting on the ground, is horrified by the force that broke her right arm. Genon says that if she is a knight, then she has no chance of defeating him. He begins to offer her to surrender, but Alita interrupts him. Interrupting him, she says she gives up and raises her hands up. A smile appears on Genon's face. He says that this is a good and reasonable choice, and Alita quickly assimilates the situation. He wanted to explain to her what would happen to her next, but he was interrupted again. Shihan is standing behind Genon. Shihan turns to him and asks that Genon was angry all this time, but immediately calmed down when Alita gave up. Was it out of pity, and did he quickly change his emotions? Genon is horrified. Shihan walked around Genon and stood with his back to him. Looking at Alita sitting on the ground, he grabbed his neck with annoyance. Genon stood in shock. Not understanding who it was, he did not understand why he did not feel the presence when Shihan was so close to him. Genon was furious. He loudly asked Shihan who he was. Shihan, who was still standing with his back, apologized and said that he had nothing against him personally, but probably it was all because of a sense of responsibility. Xian quickly turned around and hit Jenan with his fist. Jenan flew high and far to the side. Jenan fell headfirst into the bottom and found himself buried up to his waist in the ground. The ground around his fall was crumpled and covered with cracks. The knights watching the situation were horrified by the fact that Jenan was buried right in the ground. Alida, holding onto her broken arm, could not understand why Xian was opposing the soldiers of the Empire unless they were subordinates of his former allies. The clan mage said that Xian was the remnant of the evil empire and ordered him to be eliminated immediately. The knights rushed in a crowd at Xian, and he was still surprised that they all did not retreat after seeing their boss defeated. Straightening his hair, Xian said he couldn't help himself and didn't like it, but still, he began to beat the knights right and left with his bare hands. The knights flew apart from his strong blows and fell deathly somewhere to the side. While Xian fought back, he kept apologizing to the attackers and asked that there be no enmity between them. The knights were shocked that Xian was apologizing before hitting them. They asked him to stop apologizing, since he decided to beat them. Jenan struggled out of the ground, his whole body aching and trembling from the pain he was trying to contain. In a strangled voice, he called Xian a scoundrel. Raising his head, he was horrified. All his knights were lying prostrate on the ground. Jenan could not believe that an unarmed man could deal with so many soldiers. Examining the soldiers, he came to the conclusion that a minute ago he looked the same and he was lucky to survive. Then he felt fear all over his body. He seemed to remember these movements. A picture of a hero from another world appeared in his memories. Xian, who saw that Jenan woke up, was surprised. He said that Jenan was quite strong. Xian apologized and said that Jenan would have to get some more sleep. Xian swung. The space around him distorted and lit up with blue flames. Jenan screamed in horror and asked to stop. He asked if he was, but Xian did not want to listen to him and hit him. Jenan flew to the side again. This time he passed out. Xian turned around, looking at all the fallen soldiers. He repeated that he had no complaints against them and therefore saw no point in continuing to fight, but if they wanted to continue, then no problem. The clan mage chuckled. He realized that elite swordsmen and magicians were no match for him. Looking at Xian, who was calmly rubbing his fists, he could not understand where this monstrous swordsman came from. Xian turned and addressed Alida. She was still sitting on the ground, holding her broken arm. He said they would not attack anymore and asked if she was going to sit like that for a long time. Answering that no, Alida got up and Xian left. The knights just looked at them. The clan mage was not happy with what was happening and looked very angry. He told his warriors that the mission had failed and since Commander Jenan had suffered, they had no choice but to retreat and ordered the survivors to collect the corpses of their comrades. One of the swordsmen ventured to object and said that actually all the wars I live in are just buried in the ground and they don't even have a single fracture. Hearing this, the clan mage was shocked. He couldn't believe that they had been beaten so badly, but no one was hurt. Xian and Alida walked slowly through the night forest. The silence of the forest helped to relax and the moon shone brightly and illuminated the way. Xian said they wouldn't be able to follow them now. He imagined how annoying that would be. The side effects of crossing worlds turned out to be stronger. Compared to the old days, the level of his combat energy is only 1/10 of the former, and the amount of mana is decreasing. Looking at his hands, he wondered how long it would take to get everything back to how it was. Suddenly, Alida howled unpleasantly in pain. Her broken arm did not give her rest. Xian went to Alida and asked if she was okay, because it seemed to him that she had broken her right arm. Touched by Xian's concern for her, Alida looked away and said she was lucky to get off with only a broken arm. Xian said she was weird because it wasn't a reason to be happy. Xian made a bandage for her, firmly fixing her broken arm. He said that everything is ready and it should help. Alida bowed and thanked him. He replied that no problem. She said she would go then. Alida calmly turned around and began to leave. Xian was shocked by this turn of events. He shouted that where was she going? He asked if they weren't going to travel and how would she ever get out of the woods with a broken arm. She was surprised and wanted to say that if she was careful, but he interrupted her and said that she would not succeed. Xian rubbed his neck, exhaled and replied that so be it. He would help her, because it was partly his fault that she was being chased, especially since his conscience would not allow him to leave the wounded girl alone. Alida fell silent and looked at Xian strangely for a long time. Such a reaction made him nervous. Finally, Alida smiled happily. A blush appeared on her face. She said that she agreed and if so, she would be under his care. Xian nervously asked if it was necessary to think about it for so long. Rubbing his face, Xian added that she should stop calling him Mr. and just call him Xian. Alida happily replied that she understood his request. Xian turned around and asked Alida what she was going to do, because her identity was revealed and she could no longer stay here. Thinking about it, Alida replied that the nearest civilization is the village of Koran, but there may be a search party there. Alida suggested just crossing the mountain and heading to the trading city of Kagan City. A picture of a huge beautiful city popped up in her head. Meanwhile, in the royal palace of Rilstein, inside it looked very majestic and rich, beautiful wall decoration and gilded furniture. King Rilstein was standing by a bookcase when a servant approached him with a report from a search party that headed to Mount Tefillin. The first king of the kingdom of Rilstein, having closed the book, turned around and asked what news. King Rilstein walked along his numerous bookcases and turned into a corridor. He went down this corridor. The way was illuminated by lanterns burning with red flames. After descending, he went to the door and activated the magic lock of the door with his magic. It swung open easily, and he stepped into the room. A huge laboratory opened before his eyes, which was just a storehouse of books. There were all sorts of bottles with different liquids on the table, but the attention was attracted by a huge glass flask filled to the top with red liquid. Strange. King Rilstein went into the room and went to the cage, looking around his laboratory along the way. Approaching the cage, the man sitting in it, with great anger in his voice, told Rilstein to be cursed. Rilstein turned his attention to him. The man sitting in this dungeon was chained to the wall. His face was covered with beatings from torture, and some kind of magical green circle was burning under him. The man asked how Rilstein could be called a hero after what he had done. Rilstein grinned insensitively after examining the prisoner. He said that he had matured well for a whole month and called him a descendant of Rusklin. Entering the cell, Rilstein asked if he knew why the magic circle under him was green and not red. Looking at the prisoner, Rilstein explained that this means that his mana has finished transforming. Then Rusklana jerked forward, but the chain stopped him. He shouted furiously that he felt sorry for those people who worship him. Rilstein laughed very terribly and said that someone still feels sorry for someone. The prisoner did not understand why such a reaction and these words. Rilstein asked if the man whose heart was about to be torn out was not pathetic. The prisoner was horrified by what he heard. He wanted to say something, but Rilstein at the same moment was next to him and plunged his hand into his chest. Blood splashed in different directions. The prisoner coughed up scarlet blood, and Rilstein stared back just as unfeelingly. Rilstein got up and examined the heart burning in his hands. It was not enough. Gradually, the amount of pumping and concentration of mana from second-rate bloods is limited, so Rilstein will not be able to cross the spatial barrier between them. Rilstein realized that he needed more of Rusklin's pure blood. A servant came and told King Rilstein that the search party sent had failed. The servant said that they were beaten by an unknown person. He had black eyes and hair, and he looks like a Gallon race, just as the target managed to escape. Hearing the description of the unknown, Rilstein was horrified. He began to remember dark hair and eyes, along with similarities with the Galenov race. Is it really him? A picture of his former ally Sheehan, whom he had betrayed, popped up in his head. Rilstein stood apprehensively and wondered how Sheehan managed to cross the dimensions again. And even if so, Rilstein would definitely have noticed it. This simply cannot be. Sheehan's face popped up in his mind again. Meanwhile, Alita and Sheehan had already crossed the mountain and reached the trading city of Kagan City. Sheehan said that under the Empire this city was called Southern Kalania. Sheehan did not know that the name had changed. He also added that he really missed this city, because it used to be their main base here. Alita looked at Sheehan in surprise and asked what was happening in this city. Sheehan confirmed and added that this city is a place of trade. It was easy for him to hide here because of the many races that are here. Fortunately, the Gallon race was very similar to the Northeast Asians. Suddenly, Alita exclaimed in surprise. She did not recognize Sheehan's face. She asked in surprise, "Is this really the famous substitution technique of the Queen of Thieves, about which there are rumors?" The name of this famous technique is transformative energy. Sheehan's face really changed. It became more rounded. This technique allows you to manipulate the air around the face to change its features. The slightest change is enough to create the impression that you are a different person. It is known as Levinas' unique fighting technique. Sheehan interrupted Alita and explained with a stony face that this combat technique was originally developed by him and he taught Levin how to use it. Sheehan said that he could teach Alita so that she could easily hide, but she refused, arguing that she had no reason to accept such help. Sheehan turned away and said that if so, then let her forget, and by the way, they need to find a place first. Alita looked disappointed at Sheehan's back that she had missed such a chance to learn such an effective technique. Sheehan suggested she just go somewhere. They came to a building with beautiful columns. Alita was surprised because Sheehan was able to somehow come to the right place. She asked Sheehan with interest and incomprehension how he found out that there was a hotel here. Then it dawned on her, and she was horrified. 10 years ago she wasn't here, there was a gallows instead. Sheehan stood in front of the new hotel building and remembered what the gallows looked like. He exhaled and drew out with nostalgia that this place had changed a lot in 10 years. He stretched out his finger in front of him and happily said that since they had come here, then why not come here? Alita was shocked and asked Sheehan where he wanted to go. Sheehan turned around and asked if there were any ghosts there. Just then he would be able to meet familiar faces after this long time. Sheehan and Alita entered the hotel building. It was quite cozy inside. A formidable bearded man standing behind the counter abruptly and casually handed them the keys and said that these were the keys to their room. When Sheehan and Alita moved away from the counter, the man abruptly hammered on the counter with his fists and angrily said that he was already sick of the hotel business. Entering the hotel room, surprised Sheehan asked why the man behind the counter was so angry. Alita calmly explained to him what was what and Sheehan was horrified. He asked with shame that he was really being familiar all the time. Sitting on the bed, Alita agreed and explained that even if Shihan is a famous hero, talking to people in such a manner at the first meeting is a bit rude. Alita added that she doesn't mind, but she thinks the man is quite old and obviously didn't appreciate it. Shihan, burning with shame, clutched his head in horror and agreed with Alita. He said that she was right. The last time he spoke in the Astin language, there were very few people with whom he needed to speak informally and he did not even notice it. Being confused, Shihan looked guiltily at Alita and said that it turns out he insulted the girl he saw for the first time in his life. Alita calmly replied that it was nothing like that and then let him continue to speak informally. Shihan apologized shyly. Alita stood up and resolutely said that the most important thing was that they arrived safely in Karen City, where he wanted to go. She asked what he was going to do next. Shihan enthusiastically replied that he needed to get used to this place a little and he was going to travel with her a little. He asked if Alita was against it. Alita resolutely made the appropriate gesture and said that she was against it. Shihan noticed that it was very tough. Alita began to argue, saying that she was not the only local, that she was wanted and it would bring problems. She added that if, after all, Shihan insists on continuing his journey with her, despite the absence of visible reason, then she will have to invent a reason why she will stay with him. She asked if it was true that there was no need to put up with these inconveniences. Resigned to the hopelessness of the situation, Shihan said he didn't want to say it, but he had no choice. Alita looked at him with interest. He said that without him, Alita would be arrested almost immediately. Alita was horrified to hear this. Shihan began to explain that if you use summoning magic that summons someone to another world, then the dimension of this world will vibrate. But this time, in his case, no one called him because he crossed the dimensions on his own, so most likely everything is quiet in this world and no one he knows he's here. He went on to say that there are still traces of those who are trying to summon people from another world. Because of this, every time they move, there will be tiny vibrations on the interdimensional level, and as long as they leave this trace, the pursuit team will follow them. Hearing that the pursuers could find them, Alita was horrified and asked in a nervous voice that if they left traces, then no matter how they tried to escape, everything would be useless. Shihan hastened to calm her down and said that yesterday he could not do anything because he was unconscious, but today he blocked the vibration with magic. Shihan came to a conclusion. He said that while the spell is in effect, no one will be able to determine their location, but the only problem is that the spell needs to be updated every 2 or 3 days. He took a moment's pause and asked if Alita understood. After digesting all the information that Shihan gave her, Alita thought a little and agreed that she really needed him. Her face became serious again. She looked into Shihan's eyes and asked why he needed her then. Meanwhile, in the capital of the kingdom of Rilstein, Delstri, Knight Genon was furiously persuading Sir Darwin to allow him to return his honor. He said that he had to get rid of this stain on his name and be sure to catch that damned Rusklin who escaped last time. Throughout his speech, he was constantly banging his fist on his chest. Sir Darwin exhaled, looked at the Knight Genon and asked if he really sees the need for this. Given that even the king does not try to punish those responsible for the failure of the mission, he also asked if it was true that Genon wants to return to the battlefield with unprepared soldiers instead of going through a probation period. Genon again put his fist on his chest and enthusiastically said that he did not understand how one could forgive someone who disobeyed an order. He added that it was the duty of a knight to return his fallen honor. Hearing such correct words, Sir Darwin was delighted. He raised himself above the table and spoke enthusiastically that Genon had not forgotten who a true knight was, so let him go and regain his honor. Genon went to the door and pulled the handle, leaving the office. He walked down the corridor. He walked and thought that in order for Shihan and Alita to survive, they need money. They are also both masters of the sword. There is a small chance that they will work as free mercenaries. Also, judging by the direction where Shihan and Alita fled, they went to the city of Kagan City, and there is only one place where you can find tasks. If Genon uses this information and pretends to be looking for friends, asking what quest they took, then he will be able to track them. Genon admitted to himself that, to be honest, he was least interested in the one in whose veins the blood of Rusklin flows. He wanted to find out more about the identity of the man who was with her. Too similar to him, Genon decided that he would make sure of it himself. Meanwhile, in some big rich house, the servant bowed humbly, greeting the Lord and congratulating Lord Ted on his return. Lord Ted happily praised his servant and said that it was a good job. He also asked if these were the people the servant was talking about. The servant looked at Shihan and Alita. He agreed to the Lord's question and added that these were mercenaries provided by Kargan. Their names are Free Masters Alita Rilkan and Sean Stein. Alita, without turning her head, quietly asked Shihan why he introduced himself as Sean. Shihan also quietly whispered back that he had just chosen a name more similar to his own, so that even if she accidentally called him by his real name, it would be possible to release everything from the brakes. The servant bowed again to Lord Ted and added that they were masters of the sword, the rank of warriors. Lord Ted was very interested. Wars can use the combat energy of the sword, divided into 6 different ranks. The initial rank is those people who can use combat energy to enhance their physical abilities. Rank War. those who can infuse metal weapons with combat energy to create an energy combat sword. Most sword masters fall into this level. Achieving the knight rank allows you to transfer your combat energy into armor, and as soon as you reach the master rank, you will be able to endow weapons made of non-metal with combat energy. People who are at the Superman rank, capable of releasing combat energy into the air to materialize a sword-like weapon. While in the history of Terraner, there are only a few people who were able to master all the skills of combat energy. Shihan was once a divine rank sword master, but most of his combat energy and magic power were absorbed during the interdimensional jump. Shihan stood shyly. He thought that if his fighting energy was only enough for the rank of a warrior, then it was a shame. After hearing that Alita and Shihan were at the war ranks, Lord Ted happily approached and told Shihan that for a young guy like him, having the war rank was impressive. Ted was glad he had them both. Lord Ted said that the capture squad is moving out tomorrow and let Alita and Shihan rest until the next morning. Shihan came into the room and collapsed on the bed. He complained that it was very tiring to earn money. Shihan said that if everything was the same as before, he would just break into some nobleman's house and steal what he needed. Alita was surprised to ask if the legendary hero was also stealing. Shihan closed his eyes and replied that the girl he had feelings for was a thief. Alita imagined what such a duet would look like and was horrified. Shihan added that in their understanding it was not just theft. There was some justice in their actions, because all the nobles of the empire were villains. Shihan suggested that it's probably difficult to do this now. He sighed tiresomely and said that there was nothing to be done. He would have to try to earn money by killing others and sprinkling their blood on the ground. Alita replied that anyone who heard this would have thought otherwise. Shihan asked if it was right that the task was to subdue the monsters. Alita agreed and added that a pack of fire wolves was found on the territory of the Baclon estate. Although a detachment was assembled to clean up, it failed due to lack of strength, so they decided to hire mercenaries of sword masters. Shihan asked if these were the wolves that spew flames. He began to tell with a smile that 13 years ago, the first monsters he encountered were fire wolves. He and his friends tried to drive them away. Then he stopped abruptly. He remembered those despicable faces of his former friends who betrayed him and sent him back to his world. He remembered all the bad words which they told him, and he became sick of these thoughts. Shihan sat down on the bed and said that these wolves should be enough for a very good warm-up, since he had lost most of his energy. It should be a good opponent. Alita was shocked. She asked if Shihan was sure that he had lost his powers, because he could defeat her using just a spoon, and also, he easily dealt with the search group. Shihan sharply exclaimed that Alita was right. That's the point, that he needed a spoon to defeat her. He asked if she understood how weak he was. Alita exclaimed in her heart that, of course, Shihan is right, but it really pisses her off. Shihan spread his hands and said that in any case, even if his fighting energy has dried up, he still has experience. He added that just because they are of a lower level does not mean that the winner of an international PvP competition will lose to just anyone. Alita did not understand the meaning of some of the words and asked them in a puzzled voice. Shihan replied that she should not take them into her head and finally offered to get some sleep. He asked Alita to go to her room. Morning came. Lord Ted said that it had finally blossomed. Now these monsters would pay for having dared to invade his territory. He raised his sword in the air and shouted for them to attack if they could, because he, Ted Baclon, knighted by His Majesty Jackson Guard, would personally defeat them. Everyone who gathered in the capture group shouted enthusiastically. Shihan looked at Lord Ted appraisingly. He came to the conclusion that he was well armed, but it would hardly help against monsters, and it looks heavy. Disappointed, Shihan asked that it seemed the knights were still the same here. They had already gone to their destination, and Shihan remembered about Alita's broken arm. He asked how her arm was. Alita said that it was much better, and all thanks to the healing fighting energy of Shihan. Shihan's face changed to a serious one. He said he was glad to hear and ordered to start preparing. Alita asked again incomprehensibly. Shihan replied that he could smell sulfur. Suddenly, everyone was in a fuss. Lord Ted confusedly ordered all the troops to stop and prepare for an attack. A huge pack of fiery wolves was marching on the capture group, which with their bloodthirsty eyes instilled only fear. Lord Ted enthusiastically held the sword in front of him and shouted to the vile spawn of darkness to attack him, because their dark flame would not even be able to stop a knight's sword. The wolf growled terribly and hit the Lord. Shihan looked at Lord Ted lying on the ground and said that was why he had to take off his armor, because he was being dealt blows that he could dodge. Perplexed, Ted shouted in frustration that how could a knight fight at all if he wasn't even wearing armor. The knight stood and fought off the attacks of the fire wolves. One of them ordered them to hold the formation, and they can still win because this time the sword masters are with them. Shihan masterfully dealt with monsters. Shihan stopped and thought. The fire wolves turned out to be easier than he expected. If he made every effort, he could even take care of everyone himself, but he decided not to do so, because it will attract too much attention. Shihan stood there and continued to wonder that they needed mercenaries to deal with such weak monsters. One of them ordered them. Suddenly, Shihan heard all the knights screaming. They were all standing in horror because a huge great fire wolf had come. Shihan smiled. He realized who the leader of these wolves was. Shihan bared his sword and resolutely stood in front of the huge wolf. All the other mercenaries ran away in horror and shouted that everyone was escaping. Lord Todd shouted that no one should panic and this is their chance. If they get rid of the boss, the monsters will lose morale. He ordered Xian to sort it out while he protects the soldiers. Xian told Alida with a smile that it seemed they would have to do all the dirty work. Xian came to the conclusion that it was not so easy to be a mercenary. Xian ordered Alida to attack the boss while he blocked the attacks of other monsters. Alida was dismayed by such a request. Xian says he doesn't want to run away and he asks if they will be able to deal with a couple of monsters for sure. A fire wolf jumps on him and he cuts him with his sword. Xian shouts to Alida that it's time. Alida agrees and confidently runs at the enemy. Alida runs up to the huge wolf and jumps on him, preparing to strike. The wolf lets out a terrible roar and releases some blue fire from its mouth. Alida manages to react and dodge. Finally, she reaches the wolf and deals him a heavy blow with her sword. The wolf lets out a roar full of anger and desire to kill. But Alida does not think to stop. She resolutely jumps to the monster's muzzle and, strengthening the sword with the help of combat energy, sticks the sword directly into the wolf's muzzle. Xian stands and says with a smile that Alida is quite strong and it seems that he has nothing to worry about. Then something goes wrong. Lightning bolts began to form around the wolf. One of such a discharge hit Alida and she flew away. The wolf grabs Alida with its huge mouth full of sharp teeth and runs at Xian. Xian, frightened, convulsively shouted Alida's name. Alida and Xian were sitting opposite each other in the hotel. Alida asked why Xian needed her. Xian exhaled heavily and said that it was better to tell everything now so that there would be no misunderstanding between them later. He began to tell that when he first came to this world, he was summoned, sacrificing the hearts of the Rusklin royal family, so he could stay in Terraner despite the will of the Emperor. But this time, when he himself crossed the border of the worlds, how he ended up here, I look more like a summoning ceremony than a sacrifice. Xian looked at the wolf rushing with Alida in its mouth, became nervous. Xian grabbed his sword and chased after the fire wolf, who grabbed Alida. In other words, if Alida dies, then Xian will have to leave this world and return to Earth again. Xian ran after the wolf as fast as he could, but still gradually lagged behind. He cursed that he was not running fast enough because he lacked fighting energy, and while he was running, he was also wasting transformative energy. Xian was really angry. He had to wait 10 years to return. He was ready to fall from the sky naked to return to the Turator. He would not allow himself to return so humiliatingly. He fills the sword with fighting energy, the energy of the dragon sword, and drives the sword into the wolf. The wolf growls unpleasantly in pain. The sword, burning blue, overflowing with energy, went through the wolf's body like clockwork. Xian stopped, sheathed his sword, and collapsed next to Alida, who was unconscious. He exhaled and happily said that they were alive. He also made a remark to himself that he was too careless and almost returned home because of this. When Alida came to her senses, they settled down on the rocks to sit and rest for a while. Alida called Xian to ask a question. He looked at her with interest. Alida said she used to think she didn't need to know, but since they became allies, she became curious about why he was hiding his identity. She leaned forward a little and continued that the 6 kingdoms were countries founded by his comrades. He would be treated like an honored guest wherever he went. Xian folded his hands in his lap and mockingly repeated that he was an honored guest. Xian added that he would be lucky if he wasn't hanged. Xian sadly began to tell that immediately after he killed the Emperor, his allies gave him, he was forcibly sent to Earth by return magic. It all lasted a few minutes. But Xian remembers everything clearly, despite the passage of time. Alida was stunned by this turn of events. Xian went on to say that he couldn't understand why they all did this to him. None of them hesitated. It definitely wasn't a spontaneous decision. He remembered those vile facial expressions and it hurt him. What was he thinking about all that time if he couldn't notice their true intentions after so many years? They lit a fire and sat in silence. Xian looked at Alida and waited for a reaction to his sad story. He thought she was shocked because she had just got involved in a conflict against all the kingdoms in Terraner. Suddenly, Alida exhaled and enthusiastically said that it means Xian has returned to take revenge and now she understands why he hides his identity. Expecting a completely different reaction, Xian asked if she understood him correctly. Alida replied that she probably did. Xian stood up, spread his hands and asked why she was so calm then, if he had just said that she would fight with 6 kingdoms at once. Alida noticed that, in fact, all 6 kingdoms are already her enemies. She has been fighting Terraner for 10 years. She had no choice from the very beginning, so it's better to do everything possible. Xian, stunned, said that Alida was a hopeless optimist. A joyful smile appeared on Alida's face. She said that her dad also said that. Xian asked contemptuously if it was the Emperor, and Alida, a little angry, shouted that her real father was Karen, not the Emperor. Suddenly Xian noticed something. He asked Alida to stop and stared intently into the bushes of the dark forest, trying to see something through the pitch darkness. He reported that someone was approaching. They quickly inserted and got ready just in case. Alida asked who was approaching. She asked if it was an enemy. Xian replied that he was wondering if the tracking group had traveled all the way to here, and it seemed to him that this was one of the lost detachments from the Bakelin territory. Xian braced himself and said there was nothing wrong with being more careful. Alita agreed with him. Suddenly, a man appeared out of the bushes. He apologized and asked for directions, but also fell silent. Alita and Xian were horrified because it was Genon. Genon said in surprise that he couldn't even think. But he fell silent again, because Alita had already bared her sword and hit him. Genon was barely able to dodge and asked to stop because he didn't want to fight. Xian abruptly appeared behind Genon. He said that it looked like Genon really wasn't going to fight, but still, he would have to get some sleep. He filled his arm with fighting energy and stabbed Genon in the back. Genon flew high up and shouted that he was just like that skill. Genon cancelled Xian's skill in the air. The space around him lit up with a blue glow. Xian, seeing this, was very surprised. Genon landed a few meters away from them unharmed. Xian asked with interest how Genon knew how to undo this skill. This is an original skill that he used as a child. Not many people know about it even among old allies. Xian clenched a fist glowing with blue light. Xian asked Genon who he was. Genon was breathing hard, but now he was sure. Genon reached into his bag and started looking for something. Xian, noticing this, asked what he was trying to get out of his bag there. Xian's face suddenly changed to one of surprise. Genon decisively and quickly took out his underpants from the bag and handed them to Xian. He asked if it was his underwear. Xian was horrified to see what this guy was doing. Alita also stood in shock. Genon stood with a smile and handed Xian some underwear. Xian got very angry and told Alita to kill him because Genon turned out to be just a pervert. Genon screamed in horror and asked to wait. Genon kept apologizing, saying it was just some kind of misunderstanding, that he just got nervous and said what he was thinking. Xian asked if the first thing that came to his mind were cowards and again ordered Alita to kill him. Genon screamed in horror that he was giving up and waved his underpants even harder. Xian furiously asked why Genon was shaking his underpants instead of a white flag. He shouted angrily again for Alita to kill him, when suddenly he saw his name embroidered on his underpants. Seeing the inscription, Xian asked in surprise why it was written in Korean and also in his handwriting. Xian, even more surprised, admitted that these were really his underpants. Genon happily confirmed and said that he knew that his eyes were not deceiving him. Then Xian realized that he had screwed up a little. He had just noticed that the transformative magic was not working. Genon asked if Xian remembered him. Genon reminded with burning eyes that he was the boy whom Xian had saved 12 years ago in the village of Baran. Xian, not understanding what he was talking about, asked about the village of Baran. Genon enthusiastically shouted that he agreed and told Xian that he had dealt with a whole squad of Imperial soldiers who invaded his village with that skill and saved him. Genon went on to say that only later did he find out that the one who saved him was called a savior from another world. Genon spoke enthusiastically again that when he learned how to use combat energy and became a sword master, he realized that Xian uses combat energy to disperse attack forces. He enthusiastically raised his hands and said that this is a very sensitive skill that shows how attentive Xian is to others. Xian remembered everything and got a little nervous, because he just wanted to test a new skill that he had developed, but probably everything depends on the interpretation. Then he noticed something strange. If it really is that child, then Xian asked Genon to wait and asked if he was younger than him. Genon raised his hand and pointed to himself, saying that he had just recently turned 22. Xian replied that Genon looked very mature, to which Genon said, "Appearance is just a shell. The value that is inside a person is much more important." Xian rubbed his shoulder and asked where Genon could have heard such a stupid saying. Genon replied that he had only quoted his words. Xian suddenly felt even more ashamed. He remembered that he really used this stupid phrase at the time when he was in high school. Xian told Genon that now he understands why he respects him and all that. He asked if Genon thought it was strange to carry his underwear with him and asked him to put it away. Genon replied that it wasn't just the underwear. Genon began to tell that he had sculptures of the image of Xian, books The Hero of Memory, the biography of Sun Xian, a romantic fantasy crossing two worlds, a dangerous lover from a parallel dimension, how to be successful as a savior from another world, and in general all the books about him. He kept saying that he had pictures related to him, that he was collecting everything related to Lord Xian. Genon was simply glowing with joy, and Xian stood in confusion. Genon also boasted that, among other things, this pair of underwear is special. It was on Xian when he defeated the Berserker Emperor Rustanan. Genon stuck out his finger and said that he had managed to buy them at auction not for a 6-month salary. Xian said that everything was clear to him and asked Genon to lower his underpants. Genon got down on one knee, handed the sword to Xian and said that the reason he decided to swear to the Rilstein family was because the king had once been an ally of Xian. Genon confidently said that he, Genon Strait, wanted to be served by Xian on his journey. Xian cautiously asked what Genon would do if he behaved in a hostile manner towards Rilstein. Genon said in a serious voice that in this case, Rilstein would also become his enemy. Genon looked at Xian so confidently that it was impossible not to notice. Xian realized that Genon was serious and said that he agreed, but since Genon knew his identity, he could not let him go. Xian grabbed the hilt of the sword that Genon was holding out. Xian took the sword in his hand and stuck its point into the ground. He proudly said that he accepted the sword of Genon Strait. Genon looked very happy. The dream of his whole life came true. He happily said that he would try his best and would not let Lord Shihan down and would immediately take care of the rest of the fire wolves. Shihan, looking strangely at Jenon, pointed his finger to the side and said that it seemed to him that they had already done it and how Jenon did not see their dead leader in the side. Jenon was surprised and said that they always move in pairs, male and female. It seemed to Jenon that Alida and Shihan wanted to lure the female with the smell of the male's corpse. Shihan was horrified. He slowly turned around, and they all saw a huge fire wolf standing over the corpse of her defeated male. A huge fire wolf stood with her muzzle raised high, her bloodthirsty eyes burning with the desire to devour this company. Shihan took a stand and nervously said that since the fire wolves travel in pairs, it is logical that they have 2 leaders and why he did not think about it earlier. Alida looked disappointed at Shihan and asked how such an experienced person like Shihan could forget something so simple. Shihan replied loudly that this happens because many years have passed. He said that after high school, no one can calculate integrals. Alida asked with a misunderstanding what integrals were, and Shihan, scratching his neck, told her to forget about it because she wouldn't understand anyway. Jenon interrupted them and asked Shihan if he would let him figure it out for himself because he wanted to show his skills. Shihan calmly replied that he didn't mind and Jenon could do everything himself. Jenon took his 2-handed sword and stood in front of the huge wolf, preparing to attack. He thought about it. He had the opportunity to communicate and protect the hero whom he had respected all his life. But what an impression he had made on him during all this time. Jenon remembered being buried in the ground twice and felt ashamed. He shouted furiously. His battle energy surged and lit up around him, distorting the space. He decided that this time he would show how strong he really was and get Mr. Shihan's recognition. Alida was very surprised to see how strong Jenon was. She said that he had amazing fighting energy. Shihan wondered why Jenon was overreacting so much. The wolf hit Jenon with all her strength, but he easily parried the blow and screamed furiously, preparing to strike back. Jenon began to strike the wolf quickly. Alida was shocked. She thought it was amazing. Because Jenon pushes this huge beast away without even moving an inch, she realized that he spared her in that fight. Shihan thought about it and said that Alida is also quite strong for her age. But Jenon is also very good. He is very talented. Alida replied with a little contempt that it could be described as just very talented, and that's why gifted people are annoying. Shihan happily replied that all the people he knew were very talented and perhaps he expected too much from Jenon. Shihan admitted that he is not very talented. He looks more like a special adventure, since I am an earthling, and the real genius in his opinion is Levina. Alida looked at him in silence. At this time, the fire wolf growled terribly and released a jet of fire from her mouth. Jenon screamed furiously. Being right in the middle of this flame, he asked if the wolf really believed that she could harm him with this insignificant flame. He confidently shouted that this was the end and prepared to attack in a leap. Alida and Shihan were shocked at what a great angle Jenon was going to attack from, when suddenly Jenon was hit hard by lightning. He dropped his sword and fell absurdly to the ground. Alida was shocked. Did she really fall just as absurdly? Startled and disappointed, Jenon stood up and sadly asked how the fire wolf could use lightning. Alida grabbed her sword. She asked if she could sort it out. Shihan replied that it wasn't worth it and everything was fine because he was the best at handling magic. Alida exclaimed that Shihan was right because he was from another world. The army of the Mad Emperor was intimidating not only because of its strength, but also because it was impossible to harm them with magic, no matter how powerful the magician was. He was useless in front of creatures from another world. The same applied to Shihan, a man from another world. Shihan was already standing against a huge fire wolf. She again spewed flames from her mouth. Lightning flashed around the she-wolf again. A current discharge passed through Shihan with a cracking sound. Alida and Jenon were surprised that even a hero from another world fell for such a thing. Shihan fell to the ground. He was visited by deja vu. Shihan jumped up and shouted that why magic worked on him. He said with shame that this had never happened before. The wolf at that moment jumped on him and already bared her teeth. Noticing the attack, Shihan turned around. He shouted that the wolf was shaming him and struck. The space was distorted by the blue color of combat energy. The huge wolf flew back and crashed to the ground with a crash. Shihan could not understand, since the fire did not affect him, how the lightning could. Alida and Jenon went to Shihan. Alida, calling Shihan a gentleman, asked if he was okay. Shihan asked Alida not to call him Mr., but simply Shihan. Alida apologized and exclaimed that she couldn't do that. Suddenly, the fiery wolf shone with a blue light and began to slowly disappear into the air. Everyone was a little surprised and shocked by this. Shihan asked what it meant and added that now he was completely confused. They all headed back to Lord Ted's house. Lord Ted spread his arms with a joyful expression on his face and said that he was very glad that Shihan survived, because thanks to him all the monsters on his territory were exterminated. Ted showed 2 bags and said that these 600 silver coins were their reward. Shihan and Alida were walking along the street of the city. Shihan said, given the plans for the future, this will not be enough. He asked that it was true to get such a sum for one job is not bad at all. Xian caught fire with a brilliant idea. In his opinion, he said that you can just take a lot of quests and thus solve the problem with money. Alita, surprised at his stupidity, replied that orders were not frequent and they were just lucky to find a good job. Xian was upset by this news. Zenon turned to Xian, calling him great, and asked if he had completed his task. Zenon remembered that Xian had said that they needed money and showed a bag with 100 gold pieces. Alita and Xian were shocked. They asked where Zenon got such money from. Zenon drooped, clearly upset by such a question. He said that the artifact of the savior from another world was sold. He meant Xian's underwear. Xian came to the conclusion that he shouldn't have asked that question. Zenon thought that if it helps Xian, then he doesn't regret selling. Alita looked at Xian and thought that Xian's underpants were expensive. Xian exclaimed that she shouldn't even think about it. Just because he was wearing underpants doesn't mean they are expensive. Zenon asked what Xian's plan is now. He added that this money should be enough for the first time and he believes that he no longer needs to work as a mercenary. Xian, examining the bag, replied that they had 3 options. But he had not yet decided exactly where to go first, but it would be good to go to a place that would be easiest to conquer. Xian suddenly had an idea. Looking at the surprised Zenon and Alita, he said that he could not have thought that he would see such a face. He summed up that he decided that they were heading north to the kingdom of Zexengard and tossed 1 gold coin.
This friend, Harang, was beaten by the bullies and robbed of all his money. They happily left, and Harang, although being beaten so badly, was still very concerned with time. Waiting for them to leave, Harang dashed home to log into the game. His teammates were waiting for him to arrive for a mission. Because he was bullied in real life, he arrived late in the game, and time was almost up for the instancing to open. Harang didn't mind. He only needed 30 minutes to get through, and he led everyone along with him. This was a virtual reality game called Hero Mission, and it gave anyone who played it a free experience. Thus, it was becoming increasingly popular around the globe. And Harang was a famous player in this game. At first, he was only curious about trying something new, but the more he played, the more addicted he became, and he eventually surpassed most other gamers. It took him exactly 40 minutes to effectively guide everyone through the instancing, and everyone praised Harang for being a good captain. Everyone logged out one by one after finishing the task, not forgetting to remind Harang to arrive early the following day so he wouldn't be late like today. Harang watched as everyone left and felt very empty. He was going to log out as well when he noticed a strange entity, which he mistook for a monster. How the hell did it dart directly to Harang's face, scaring Harang? He swung his sword up and cut that entity, but his body refused to obey his commands. What the heck was going on? Harang was terrified as his body slowly faded away. Harang awoke in a strange place, not knowing where he was, and before he could figure it out, more individuals rushed to assault him. Harang attempted to log out but failed to do so, and he was targeted by a large number of people. Harang's face was still flushed with fear. The cut they'd caused to bleed dulled his pain. This was the actual world, not a game. Harang fled in terror because those people knew how to communicate. They weren't monsters, but with this many of them, Harang couldn't fight back. Harang was pinned to the ground by them when there was a sound that stopped them. 2 people, 1 man and 1 woman, came out of the forest. They told their subordinates to pick up Harang and begin inquiring about his identity. Harang didn't know how to respond when there was a shout and a head rolled to his feet, turning him blue all over. A large butcher emerged from the woods, and those surrounding Harang jumped alertly to attack that guy. But this man was too powerful. Each time he swung his knife, he killed someone. Harang shivered as he observed. This wasn't a game anymore. What he saw was the fact that the gore shot out, which made Harang consider running away. Suddenly, someone pulled his leg back, pleading with him to save the girl, who was trying to fight off the butcher. But how the hell could Harang save her when that guy smelled of danger and Harang was simply a normal person? At this point, a system board appeared in front of Harang, instructing him to rescue Princess Yuda. Princess Yuda, wasn't this an NPC in the game? Harang didn't want to do it, but if he didn't, he would die. Yuda was about to die when Harang grabbed a random sword and rushed at the butcher. He asked Yuda to quickly run away while he stopped the butcher. But that butcher was too strong. Every time he swung his knife, he launched Harang a dozen meters into the air. The butcher continually charged at Harang without giving him a chance to catch his breath. Harang was stunned, suddenly understanding that something was quite familiar. This guy's attack was very similar to the rhythm of a boss Harang played in the game. If that was the case, Harang could defeat the butcher. He could overcome that guy when he had the skills and equipment in the game, but with a blunt sword like this, how could he defeat that guy? Harang could only fight off the butcher's attack. Harang turned back and noticed Yuda hadn't run away. He was going to give in. What the heck was she doing? Harang was exhausted when Yuta secretly attacked the Hemoptysis butcher while his guard was down. They believed it was over after the butcher fell, but how the hell could he still get up and fight after such a devastating blow? Harang and Yuta were each beaten into a corner by the butcher, and no one had the strength to stand up and fight. Fortunately for them, someone else came to save them at that very moment. As that person slashed the butcher to death, he rushed to see if Yuta was okay. Luckily, she just passed out without affecting her life. The bulletin board appeared in front of Harang. He had finished his assignment of defending the final member of the royal family, Princess Yuta of the Ale Kingdom, but there were still many more assassins targeting her, so Harang needed to follow Yuta while waiting for his next mission. Harang was completely perplexed. It was obvious that everything taking place in front of him was quite real, so what the hell was this quest board? He was wondering about it when Yuta called him. She would return Harang's life-saving favor and ask him to follow her. The guard standing next to Yuta was a little worried about this, but Yuta already trusted Harang because she might have died earlier. If Harang had been a bad person, he would have killed Yuta at that same time. Before leaving, she had to bury the others carefully. Life was cruel when her entire family was betrayed, pursued, and murdered by them. Traitors lived in glory, while loyalists died here. The butcher's failure was reported to the assassins in the meantime, but they didn't need to take action quickly because they knew where Yuta was headed. Princess Yuta went to Mawan, a rural area where her uncle lived. Mr. Mawan hurried out to hug his niece after hearing that she had arrived safely. It had been 10 years since they had seen each other, and happily, she was still safe after all. Mr. Mawan assumed that the two individuals going alongside Yuta were the two knights escorting her after seeing them. The Sun Imperial Guard captain actually escorted her, but Harang wasn't with them. Instead, he just saved Yuta on the way here. She requested that Uncle Mawan reward Harang for helping her. Mawan approached Harang and stared at him, thinking that to be able to save Yuta, Harang was obviously not a normal person. Mawan then instructed the butler to set up rooms for everyone to rest. That night, Harang lay in bed, wringing his hands and wondering what was going on. He tried to log out of the game but failed. The mission loomed, forcing him to complete it or die. Without any clues, Harang could only carry out the mission. He had to follow Princess Yuta, waiting for the next mission. Harang was curious about the reward Yuta had promised to give him. As he was about to fall asleep, the system board abruptly appeared to alert him to a new main task. Harang had to protect Princess Yuta from the hobbyists. Harang jumped out of bed and went to collect some weapons as assassin Goran made his way to Mawan's room. In order to protect his niece, it turned out that Mawan colluded with the assassins. He arranged for the Sun Knight to be far away from Princess Yuta to make it easier for the assassins to carry out this mission. His niece was being guarded by these individuals, and this was the only option for him to save her. Therefore, he had to offer Yuta's life. Having a nightmare of her father dying in front of her, Yuta awoke in fear as a knife was about to stab her in the neck. Harang appeared just in time to knock the assassin away and shoot him, infuriating him. Before killing the princess, the assassin had to deal with Harang and see what he could do in the dark. Harang punched the assassin against the wall as he ran towards Harang. At this moment, Gorian had managed to get here. He was completely different from that assassin. Harang was blown away by Goran, but he still hurried towards the princess, needing to protect her, but his power wasn't enough to fight Goran. Princess Yuta attempted to sneakily attack Goran when he was caught off guard, but was unsuccessful. Goran then pinned the princess to the ground and remarked that he had killed many people, but no one had ever been a royal. His whole body trembled with joy as he was about to do this task. Harang swung the blade in Goran's face, seizing the chance to hurry over, hug the princess, and leap out the window into the canal below. Meanwhile, when Old Man Mawan was told that Gorian had failed to assassinate him, he became concerned that his niece would be in danger. Mawan had set up the Sun Knight to be far away from Princess Yuta in order to assassinate her as soon as possible, but how the hell could Gorian still fail? Mawan then mobilized all the soldiers in the area to find the princess as quickly as possible. Harang, on the other hand, came up from the river in a panic when he couldn't see the princess anywhere. Harang discovered her in the distance as she was going to drown, so he rushed to get her ashore. Harang carried the princess into a nearby bungalow to rest. He didn't know what to do next. All he could do was wait until she awoke. But he had certainly saved Princess Yuta. How could the rescue mission not be over? Meanwhile, when Night Sun found that he had been betrayed by Mr. Mawan, he attempted to fight the soldiers, but Gorian appeared at that point. Princess Yuta awoke in the bungalow and took a deep breath, thankful that at least she was still alive. Harang was about to say something when Yuta complimented him, saying that he was very brave because he had once again saved her life. She promised to repay him for his heroism, but first she needed to return because Mr. Mawan was definitely looking for her. When Harang sprinted after her to inquire as to why she was being sought after, Yuta immediately chuckled. The royal family was decaying and losing power, so this was bound to happen someday. She had already lost all of her loved ones, so in order to survive, she needed to become stronger. Yuta suddenly became aware of something hanging overhead and became concerned that it might be the Sun Knight. Sun Knight had already lost to Gorion, but by hanging him up so high, Yuta realized that Uncle Mawan had betrayed her. As the soldiers found them, Harang quickly grabbed Yuta's hand and fled. And Mawan was impatient at the time, mobilizing everyone to look for her. He needed to get Yuta here or his niece would be in danger. Sun laughed at this. A traitor like Mawan yet concerned about others? Mawan knew his guilt, but he would pay for it later. Then Sun yelled at Yuta to leave him and flee, saying that it had been incredibly pleasant for him to serve Yuta up until the very end of his life. Mawan was furious and prepared to let the troops cover Sun's mouth when Gorion stopped him, saying that allowing Sun to scream might make Goron catch his target faster. It was true to Goron's expectations. Knowing Sun was still alive when she heard his voice, Yuta ignored the threat and went back to save him. Harang didn't want to go, but if the mission failed, he would have to die. Therefore, he had to go after this headstrong girl. Harang disguised himself as a soldier to break into Sun's custody, knocking the two guards unconscious and quickly untying Sun. Gorion, however, had already anticipated their arrival, so he ordered the soldiers to ambush them everywhere. The last time, he had allowed them to escape, but if they were foolish enough to return in this way, there would be no second chance. Meanwhile, Old Man Mawan sat in the room waiting. He was impatient when the soldiers came to announce that they had captured Princess Yuta. Upon Mawan's arrival on the scene, Gorion was able to restrain Harang and Sun. However, Harang did not take the princess with him, forcing Goron to interrogate him rather than kill him. Harang was silent and didn't say anything, and Gorion couldn't read Harang's mind. Then Goron chuckled, curious to see if Harang could still stiffen his mouth if tortured. Mawan dashed off to see the princess, but there was no princess here. Yuta was disguised as a soldier right behind him. Yuta pulled her sword, detained Mawan, and forced Gorion to release the other two teammates. Goron, however, was not at all afraid and pinned Sun to the ground to warn Yuta that if she tried to act against Mawan, she would lose these two loyal teammates. And as Old Man Mawan remembered the old scenario of him playing with his niece, he softly requested the troops to let them go. Mawan's soldiers, not Gorion's, saw the general's request, so they released Sun and Harang. Without having much time to explain, Harang grabbed Sun and was about to leave when Gorion couldn't let them go so easily. He drew out his knife and hurled it at Princess Yuta. As Harang noticed this, he quickly pulled Yuta away, resulting in the throw that hit Mawan. Gorion injured Mawan, so the soldiers rushed to exact revenge. The soldiers raced to seek vengeance for Mawan, leaving Gorion unable to counterattack. Goron could still resist, but with so many of them, he couldn't kill them all in one turn. Taking advantage of the chaos, Harang helped Sun and Princess Yuta escape. At this moment, Gorion's comrades arrived. He left the group of soldiers for Goron to handle and rushed to attack Yuta's group. Sun struggled to get out of there. There was a pier to the west, and they needed to get there immediately. But Gorion arrived in time and sliced a shot, causing Sun to fall to the ground. Princess Yuta angrily rushed to attack Goron, but she couldn't fight against him. He knocked her to the ground, then began spewing sarcastic words about why Yuta had to be concerned about this dog, which enraged Yuta even more. Sun was a comrade and a friend Yuta could not abandon, unlike Goron, who could only follow orders. Gorion laughed out loud. If so, he would let her go with her friend. Harang regained his composure and raced to the rescue at this point. Goron had been waiting for Harang for so long that he had to kill Harang first, followed by Yuta. Goron grinned as Harang sliced at his weapon, stating that he wanted to show Harang something interesting. Harang quickly moved to the defensive after sensing Goron's threat, but Goron slashed Harang away. Harang noticed that Goron was utilizing a move that was comparable to the Dark Warrior skill in the game. However, while that move had great destructive power, it took some time for users to rebalance, which meant there would be many holes at that time. Harang was sure he could handle it. Gorion slashed Harang down the cliff, believing him to be dead, and then turned to face the princess. However, Harang was more sluggish than Gorion had anticipated. He didn't fall but was instead climbing with his broken sword. Princess Yuta glared at Gorion indignantly, which made him uncomfortable. The nearly dying person should not have this attitude. If Yuta bowed down and begged him, he may even take sympathy. Of course, Princess Yuta couldn't do such a shameful thing, so she hurried to assault Gorion even though she knew she wasn't his opponent. Only now did Gorion tell her some interesting information, including the fact that the guy who murdered her father was not his master but a relative of the emperor. Gorion was about to say his name when Harang raced over and knocked him away. Harang's stubbornness annoyed Gorion, and he vowed this time to kill Harang. Harang was certain that he could stop Gorion's new move when Gorion pulled it off. However, after the first sword, Harang's hope was completely lost, and his shoulder was seriously hurt, which puzzled Harang because he had undoubtedly blocked Gorion's sword. Gorion charged up to strike Harang once more, and Harang strained his eyes to observe Gorion's move. As soon as the two swords touched, Gorion twisted his blade, deflecting Harang's sword. This maneuver was identical to the one done by the Dark Knight when he entered a state of rage. Harang attempted to calmly imagine that this was a game, that no matter how flowery the move was, there were always weaknesses, and that he had to break this guy's moves like he did in the game. Once again, Gorion let Harang down. Harang lacked the strength to break this move, and his leg was also hurt. Would he die here? It couldn't be like that. Harang racked his head and thought until he suddenly understood something. He hurled his broken blade straight at Gorion, then rushed to attack Gorion because Gorion hadn't returned to his position. Gorion swung his leg and attempted to kick Harang, but Harang managed to circle behind him, picking up his sword and slashing both Gorion's weapon and his face. Harang won, and this made Princess Yuta surprised at who he was after all. Harang breathed a sigh of relief after taking Gorion down, but Gorion got up and punched Harang in the stomach. When Harang awoke, it turned out to be a dream. He was lying in a cave and had no idea where he was. At this point, a new task notification appeared, indicating that he had successfully finished it. There were 7 main missions in all, and each time Harang completed a mission, he would receive a piece of returned stone with a certain skill. Harang was perplexed. If he collected all 7 bits of stone, would he be able to return to his actual life? The skill he was given was Killing Power, which he already had at the start of the game. The place he was in was different from the game he had played, but the skills were the same. Sun entered at this point, and he was not dead but severely injured. Harang had been unconscious here for 5 days when Sun told him what happened while he lost consciousness. Sun was amazed that Harang could defeat Gorion like that. Harang passed out soon after, and while Gorion's friends were still busy with Mawan soldiers, Sun took advantage of the chance to bring the princess and Harang here. Sun reminded Harang to go see Princess Yuta. She was very concerned about him as he had been unconscious for 5 days. Outside, Yuta was still puzzled by Gorion's words. If her father hadn't been slain by Gorion's boss, Zod, who was it after all? Sun and Harang walked out at this point, and Yuta inquired why Harang risked his life to save her. Seeing that Harang was silent, Yuta didn't force him to say it, and then she took Sun out to get some food. Harang abruptly revealed why he had saved her. He knew what it was like to need someone to come and help. Yuta touchingly took Harang's hand in appreciation. As soon as she and Sun left, the second task arrived. Harang needed to transport Princess Yuta over Guangku. The previous mission had very clear instructions, but this second mission was extremely vague. Harang sat confused, expecting that the mission would be accomplished by simply guiding Princess Yuta through Guangku. At this point, the princess ran to find him. Seeing Harang pondering something, she was very curious. Harang then asked the princess what Guangku was and which of the several Guangku he should take her through. There were so many things Harang hadn't told the princess yet, so she hoped that if Harang thought of her as a friend, he would tell her the truth. Harang quickly assumed he had amnesia, and then Sun proceeded to tell the princess to leave. Zod had already assumed office, and he had dispatched a team of elite assassins to track them down. It was better for Harang's team to stay away from them now because they were so powerful. It was time for Harang to say goodbye to them, but he offered to accompany them until his memory recovered. Yuta smiled and agreed to let him accompany her. While moving, they happened to see a heist, and the other girl struggled to protect the food, knowing that if she was robbed, the people in the village wouldn't be able to survive, even if she had to die. Sun hurried to stop the bandit when he was ready to act. Harang did not sit back and watch them do whatever they wanted. Instead, he raced to duel with the leader, who angrily swung his sword and slashed Harang, but Harang swiftly jumped into the sky, his sword slashing down the giant bandit. Harang was getting used to this new body, it was much more flexible. Harang's group left after helping the girl. Suddenly, the girl shouted and begged them to accompany her back to the village with the food. She couldn't go there alone, she would die if she lost this food. As a result, they assisted her in bringing back the food. She introduced herself as Naring and gave Harang a flower instead of thanking him for helping. At the village, Harang got information that there was a Guangku named Dayan nearby, so he needed more information about this Guangku. Suddenly, Harang noticed a group of soldiers approaching the village. These were the people who were pursuing Princess Yuda. They summoned Naring to question her about Yuda's group, and they even brought the bandit earlier, which scared Naring. She testified that they only helped her at the time and then went their separate ways. The commander, however, didn't think she was telling the truth, so he dispatched soldiers into the village to investigate every home. But because they couldn't find Yuda's group, they sliced the bandit to death, using him as an example to frighten Naring that if she dared to hide for Yuda's group, her entire village would die. Naring dared to take Yuda's group out after they had left, and she took them to meet the village head. Even though they had saved her village, they were obviously a threat to Naring's entire village. The village chief put on an annoyed face for Yuda's group. The princess understood, she didn't need them to say anything, and she promised to leave before dawn. Naring was quite upset about having to end things with them so quickly. Harang was depressed as well. He had intended to remain in this village to look for information on Guangku, so what should he do now? Naring then led their group out of the village, and on the way she tried to speak well for her village head, who wasn't generally so harsh, but Yuda understood that if she stayed, the entire town would be involved in disaster. Naring yearned to learn more about the outside world from Yuda, but it seemed that their destiny only brought them here. As they were about to part ways, Sun detected an ambush. The general's men had remained in the town and were waiting for them because he suspected that Yuda's squad would have to go in this direction. The general ordered the soldiers to kill everyone except for Princess Yuda. As the commander rushed to attack Harang, Harang pulled his sword quickly to halt the general. He managed to withstand the slash, but the horse pushed forward, shocking Harang so much that he hurried to get out. If the general was still on his horse, it would have been too risky for Harang to engage in combat. In order to have a chance, he had to knock the general off. Princess Yuda also pulled out her sword and got ready for battle. She wasn't a helpless person waiting for someone else to come to her rescue. She would handle this situation on her own. Seeing that the princess's will was still too strong, the other man played a psychological prank on her by telling her that Yuda's clan had entirely collapsed and that her efforts would be useless. He said that if she surrendered now, he would give her the smoothest death. The general kept charging towards Harang, but Harang was only able to counterattack because the general was still on his horseback, so the blow couldn't reach him. Princess Yuda then intervened to remind Harang that due to the terrain's extreme limitations, each time the general hurried to attack, it would take him some time to regain his position and, at that time, he would expose numerous weaknesses. Therefore, Harang needed to seize the opportunity to attack. He continued to rush, and this time the princess bore the hit, giving Harang the opportunity to cling to the horse. To avoid injury, the general was forced to jump off his horse. When the general stepped off, Harang assumed he was just like any other soldier, but it wasn't until now that the general exploited his actual power. Harang was surprised but swiftly dodged the man's skills. That was his chance to put his newly acquired skills to use. Harang and the general confronted each other, but in the end, Harang was still the winner. Harang and Princess Yuda hurried up to deal with the rest of the soldiers when a person circled behind Harang to sneak Naring in and force them all to obey him. Harang's mission was to safeguard Princess Yuda, but after remembering Naring's innocent smile, he couldn't leave her alone. How, though, could he save her? Harang had considered dropping his sword and sneaking that man, but doing so had a very poor chance of success, and if he used his skills, things might get even worse. Harang couldn't think of a solution. Yuda suddenly moved forward and declared that if the man released Naring, she would voluntarily follow him. Sun was confused by the princess's actions. What was she doing? Yuda simply grinned, thinking that since she was a royal, it was her duty to safeguard her people and reassure them that she would return safely. Then she followed the other guy. The Harang group had no idea what to do once the princess went. Now that Naring said she knew where they would bring the princess, she would take Harang and Sun there, begging them to trust her. Therefore, they went after Naring. As a girl who had never traveled this far before, Naring's legs were easily sprained, but Sun disregarded her. Only Harang returned to help Naring up. He didn't understand why Naring wanted to follow them because doing so would put her life at risk. The first time Naring was saved by such a stranger, she wanted to repay Yuda. Naring took them to the Dayan citadel, where the princess was imprisoned. Since there were so many soldiers, going directly there was impossible. Harang, however, had another plan. He would break into this citadel by using the wind. At that moment, the princess was negotiating with a man named Akka, whom her father talked a lot about. Akka was a man of integrity, but he had to recognize that Zod was the genuine king of this kingdom, and the princess's royal family had been turned away by the entire population. Harang had a tool that could outwit the other guards, but looking at that simple device made Sun a little pale. Could this truly take them down there? Harang, though, was confident that if they utilized the wind and the sunrise well, they would be able to break in. Dawn would help them cover the eyes of the guards down there, so this was the ideal time for them to break in. Sun followed Harang's commands and joined him in gaining momentum. Meanwhile, Marang, who brought Princess Yuta back, was Akka's son, and he was being reviled by Akka because he lost to an unknown person. Marang didn't deny his defeat. He had spent a lot of time training on his internal strength, but that person was even stronger than him. Undoubtedly, Harang would be a lot stronger if Marang left him like that. Harang and Sun swung down the citadel, and as they neared the citadel gate, Harang called Sun back to the landing spot, where they would swing on the flagpole and try to land. However, the wind was stronger on Sun's side, leading him to be blown to the other side, landing safely, but they were in two different locations. Harang didn't have time to think about that. He had to go save the princess first. Since there were so many guards down below, Harang noticed that the architecture of this castle was remarkably similar to that of a location in the game named Tianmen Moon City. If that were the case, the princess would have had to be imprisoned underground. Harang passed the guards and walked down when he heard a scream. He didn't know what it was, but Harang was curious, so he went there to watch. The scene in front of him made Harang take a step back in horror. A big guy was hitting a small girl. This scene was identical to what Harang had experienced in the real world. Harang angrily came over to the big guy. Harang was different now. Then he took this guy out, picturing him as the bully, and pounded him in the ground. After beating the other soldier, Harang sat in a corner. The small girl thought Harang was too brave and applauded him as a hero, but he couldn't understand what she was saying. He took the key from the guard and opened the handcuffs for the girl. Harang hastily left after finishing his work here since he needed to save Princess Yuta and get out of here before they discovered it. When Harang entered the tower's basement, where numerous prisoners were held, the prisoners became incredibly angry and resembled the large man who had pursued Princess Yuta. Suddenly, an arrow flew towards Harang, but he noticed and pushed it aside. The person who captured Princess Yuta knew Harang would come here anyway, so he had prepared to defend Harang. He provoked Harang to see if Harang or his arrows were faster. There was no time. Harang was about to attack them with his best skills when the young child he had just saved showed up and charged at them. Meanwhile, the princess in the cell kept thinking about what Akka had said. The princess was surprised by a laugh. He questioned her about why she had come here and told her that he was guilty of the remnants of the old dynasty and was imprisoned here. Yuta quickly identified herself as a princess and demanded that he reveal his identity, but he chuckled and stated that she actually turned out to be the despicable man's daughter. He was Hasso, the great commander of the imperial army. Yuta was startled. Wasn't he already dead? Yuta's father imprisoned Hasso here because Hasso called Yuta and her father fools. If the kingdom wanted to rule, it needed killing, but he claimed that Yuta's father was so foolish that he wished to live in peace with the barbarians. Yuta hardened her throat, unable to respond. Now that Harang had arrived, the other little girl was following him. Yuta became aware that the young girl was a barbarian after looking at her. Harang opened the cage to let Yuta out, and the barbarian girl enthusiastically took Yuta's hand in greeting. This was Yuta's first encounter with a barbarian, and her hands were so heated. However, in reality, they were human beings, not inferiors. She led Yuta to another cell, where the elderly guy seated had orders from Yuta's father. Harang hurriedly urged Yuta to leave quickly, but Yuta asked him to release all of them. The barbarians were all big, and because they had just been set free, they raced to surround Harang, turning him pale. But as soon as the old man said something, they backed away. The leader of this group of barbarians, that old man, made a vow to Yuta that they would all survive and leave together. He then mobilized all the barbarians to attack in unison. Meanwhile, Commander Akka had heard about the chaos in the prison, so he put on his armor and assembled all the soldiers around the city gate, insisting on capturing Princess Yuta. Sun was still engaged in combat with the guards when suddenly there were too many barbarians, turning him a little pale. Nevertheless, he had to continue to fight. Sun was about to charge up when the princess appeared in time to stop him. They were just about to break through when Mr. Akka showed up. He was so powerful that every time he swung his sword, a barbarian died. Akka was perplexed by the princess's relationship with these inferior barbarians. The princess yelled fiercely that they were humans as well, but the soft words were identical to those made by her father. Akka threatened that if she chose to betray him, he would murder her right here. Akka charged towards Yuta's hand with lightning speed, turning her pale. If he was serious, she was basically unable to stop him. Akka charged up again, and Yuta was about to be attacked when the old barbarian commander took the hit for her, and he collapsed. Yuta gritted her teeth and picked up the necklace, vowing to keep the promise her father had made to the elderly man. Harang battled Akka, but Akka was so sure of himself that no one had ever survived under his blade. He would make Harang regret it. The princess hurried forward to assault Akka, enraged that Akka could kill barbarians so easily, despite the fact that they were humans too. Akka didn't care. The reason he sat in this tower was to protect the people of the kingdom from the barbarians. He would send Yuta off to see her father. Harang feared the princess wouldn't be strong enough to withstand Akka. He was ready to run up to save her when Yuta stopped him. She wouldn't back down because if she ran away, she wouldn't be strong enough to continue in her father's footsteps. The princess promptly took a hit from Akka's sword swing. The princess was gravely injured as a result of the attack, but she also left a cut mark on Akka's face, making him unable to keep his face calm anymore. He raced forward with all his power, aiming to kill the princess. At this very time, Harang charged and knocked him flying, surprising Akka at how a skinny man like Harang could do such a thing. Akka stood irately to employ his technique, but Harang broke that move once more and knocked Akka away. Akka only just now understood the move Harang employed. It was one that had been lost from the old era, so how the hell could Harang use it? Akka fled as soon as he realized he couldn't defeat Harang. The soldiers were unsure of what to do because their commander had already escaped. At this point, Yuta stepped up and implored everyone to stop. They were merely following orders from their superiors, and because of Akka, so many people had already died. She didn't want any more casualties. The troops were moved by Princess Yuta's words, and they all dropped their weapons and submitted to her. After a long wait, the gates of Dayan Citadel were finally opened. Sun and Princess Yuta went out to see the barbarian land, and she declared that the Dayan Citadel's gates would never be closed again. Harang sighed as he stood on the side, having finally accomplished the second assignment. Harang gained another piece of resurrected stone as well as the talent Death War, and his strength was now equivalent to that of a kingdom knight. Harang reminded himself to work harder so that he could return after obtaining the final 5 pieces of stone. Harang paid Princess Yuta a visit 3 days later. She claimed to have learned from Sun that Harang broke in using the wind. Yuta had attempted to appear calm since she was taken away, but she was terrified of when she would die. From a young age, as royalty, Yuta had no friends. She wanted to play freely, like other kids, but her circumstances disallowed it. It wasn't until now that Yuta felt like she had a friend. She gave Harang, her friend, a beautiful sword. Hopefully Harang would take it without any stress. In the days that followed, it appeared that the soldiers in the city of Dayan could not get along with the barbarians. They frequently argued with one another, and if Sun hadn't intervened to settle the conflict, they might have even killed one another. Sun returned to the princess and informed her that things were getting worse. Yuta knew they couldn't easily get along, but it wasn't an urgent matter. Soon, Zod would send forces here to capture them, but their power was insufficient to fend them off. Yuta reasoned that there must be a force ready to assist them in their time of need, and she chose the Shishan Autonomous Land so that they might accept her request. Yuta needed someone knowledgeable about kingdom politics, so she headed down to the prison to free Ah Hoso. Harang was summoned to the princess's room. Undoubtedly, there was something to ask for. The princess did not beat around the bush and told Harang that she needed him to deliver a letter to the kingdom of Shishan Autonomous Land. Shishan was also the location of his next task, so Harang accepted, but he had no idea how to get there. This wasn't a problem because Yuta had arranged for Harang to have a companion. Gumming, a boy, used to live near the Shishan area, so he was extremely familiar with the terrain. Before departing, Yuta told Harang to carefully check it. The contents of the letter would be totally meaningless if the outer seal was lost, so Harang had to be particularly careful. After accepting the task, Harang and Gumming departed. The contents of that letter were written by Ah Hoso himself, and although Yuta still didn't fully trust him, they had no choice. She didn't know whether King Norhan would accept, so she had to wait until Harang came back alive. Gumming was ecstatic on the journey, believing that as a resident of the kingdom, everyone had to visit Shishan at least once because it was not only an autonomous region but also a sacred sanctuary that drew people from other places to train. When Gumming first saw Shishan, he was astounded, and from that moment on, he vowed to one day become an outstanding swordsman. Suddenly, there was a sound in the bushes, and Gumming sensed danger, so he instructed Harang to take a step back. A person rushed out of the bush to assault Gumming, but that youngster fought back right away. Harang, however, recognized her as the girl he had saved the previous time, so he stood up to stop them. Gumming was astonished to remind Harang that he didn't see the letter on Harang's back. Harang was pale. How could he have lost it somewhere or dropped it without being aware? Harang hurriedly turned around to see where it fell. At this time someone from a tree called out to him for being poor. I thought he was carrying something of great value. Who would have thought there was a letter like this? Harang was startled that the guy had already unsealed the letter. Gumming angrily scolded him for stealing and asked to return it. He didn't listen if he wanted to take it back. He chased it and took it. This guy's speed is very fast and he even knows how to hide himself. He jumps off the cliff with one shot. Unable to lose track of him, Harang also jumped down with his life, but when he landed, he was nowhere to be found. The barbarian girl caught up with Harang. She bent down to the ground and sniffed once and immediately found the other guy's location. Although she did not understand her voice, she seemed to be asking Harang to follow her. The other guy was sitting in a corner waiting. He saw that Harang was a bit slow and he was starting to get bored. At this time, the girl caught up to attack him from behind, but he still noticed and dodged. Harang chased him to the place asking him to return the letter to her. This guy still doesn't care. He said if he's good, he'll come and get it himself. Harang sighed for 1 hour and continued to chase after him. This guy's speed was too fast. He continuously dodged his attacks. Suddenly Harang stopped making him think he had given up. Of course Harang wasn't just regaining it. He couldn't waste any more time with him. Harang activated his new death fighting ability, rushed to the other man with a speed that startled him. Just as Harang was about to punch him in the mouth, he surrendered. After getting the letter back, Harang left immediately regardless of what the other guy asked. No one had ever surpassed his speed before, which made him suspect that Harang was that person. A few days later, Harang reached Thatch Sun, sealed on the lost letter and he could only risk it. The quest board appeared. Harang had to collect thousands of years of herbs in this land. What the heck is Harang's third quest with the 1000-year herbal medicine? Wu Ming spoke up to remind Mr. Harang that he had regained consciousness and entered with them into Thatch Sun. There were a lot of swordsmen in this place, all of them exuding a strong aura, making Wu Ming so excited that he couldn't stop talking. They had to wait to see King Norhan, had been sitting for more than an hour, but Harang was silent and didn't say a word, causing Wu Ming to pressure. He felt that just waiting a little longer would make him go crazy. Fortunately they were summoned to meet the king at this time. Since he was not feeling well, his wife Jiam would welcome him on her behalf. However, when they delivered the letter to her, she immediately sent them home when the seal on the letter was gone. Wu Ming tried to explain it was taken down by a barbarian but she didn't care. Sealing the letter is the most basic thing to negotiate, but if you can't do it, there's no need to say more. She asked the servants to throw them all out, but at this time Mr. Norhan spoke again when he heard this letter came from Princess Yuda. He heard that the royal family was dead, so he was curious to see what was in the letter. As soon as he finished reading the letter he immediately tore it apart, not accepting any alliance. However, if they could bring back millennial herbs, he might consider it. Then they all went to the room to discuss. Harang wanted to hear more information about that 1000-year-old herb. Wu Ming also only heard about it. It can resurrect people but never appeared. Harang suddenly remembered something and asked Wu Ming about a place with double peaks. Wu Ming assumed that the place he was referring to was Dang Thien. Harang needed to go there to investigate something, so he asked Wu Ming to lead the way. King Norhan heard that he had moved there, and he ordered Asul to lead the cavalry to follow Harang's group when he had the opportunity to kill them all. Wu Ming heard rumors that King Norhan had been ill for a long time, and invited many doctors to treat him without success. That's why he wanted them to search for herbs for thousands of years, because no matter how strong he was, he couldn't fight disease. Wu Ming led Harang to the top of Dang Thien, the double mountain. Looking at this area, it is indeed identical to a copy in the game. Just entering here you will find clues about the 1000-year-old herb. Harang led Wu Ming and the barbarian girl inside. This place was extremely desolate as if there was an ancient relic here. Wu Ming also heard that there used to be a tribe here, but suddenly they all died without knowing the cause. Since then, this place has not been visited by anyone. Harang looked around and sure enough he guessed right. Harang saw a tree root here where there was no light but still had roots. That herbal plant was probably just around in this area. But the way here is like a maze. If they go, they will be lost forever in this place. Suddenly, the barbarian girl spoke as before, although she did not understand what she was saying, but seeing Harang's gesture, she could tell that she was leading the way. Together they went deep into the ruins. Wu Ming was rambling when suddenly someone sneaked up on him. Harang noticed this, but the other guy was still able to cut Wu Ming's hand. The boy fell to the ground, his face pale and his wound oozing something purple that was poisonous. The sneak attack was clearly cut in half by Harang and still managed to get up. Their numbers have increased. Harang used a technique to cut them to death, but how the hell they were able to reconnect themselves must have had some trick. Harang slashing at the other man suddenly realized his body reconnected before he slashed. If that's the case, then this trick is just a trifle. If this was just a trick of the other guy, then Harang was confident he could overcome it. He cut all his followers to pieces. This time, they can't resurrect themselves anymore. The leader who saw that also had to slowly praise. Unexpectedly, an anonymous person like him could break his great move, so he must also let Harang know his title before he dies. He is Asul, the captain of the secret assassin squad. He has received orders to kill all the intruders in this area. The poisoned Wu Ming lay writhing on the ground screaming. The Asul thought that the poison had already spread throughout Wu Ming's body. It's too late to save the kid at this rate. Harang doesn't care. He didn't have time anymore and had to get over this guy quickly and think of a way to save Wu Ming. Harang and him exchanged swords. It was clear that he was able to stab him in the chest. How the hell did he not get hurt but automatically recovered everything? He slashed at Harang's shoulder. This slash was also poisonous. He tried to finish him off quickly before the poison did. However, the poison took effect too soon, causing Harang to lose his momentum, and the Asul hit him and flew straight into the corner of the wall. Harang's whole body was paralyzed by poison. He only had one more chance with all his remaining strength. Harang used his new skill to attack Asul. He still did not do anything, but this time Harang had a different purpose. He had knocked the ceiling off so it fell straight on his head so he couldn't move. The poison started. Harang passed out soon after. He saw a place full of blood. That was the end. Remembering the fun time with Yuta, Harang was also satisfying enough. Suddenly someone pulled his leg from the pool of blood. Harang was startled awake. He was not dead, but was saved by the red-haired thief from before. The young Wu Ming also woke up soon after. The red-haired guy didn't say much. He claimed they owed him a life. Harang knew that this guy saved them on purpose, so he asked straight away. Redhead thinks that there is nothing difficult, he just needs you to be his disciple. He saved you one life, you accepted him as a teacher, this price is too good for Harang. Wu Ming was angry when this guy was too delinquent and was about to scold him, but Harang immediately refused. He was grateful to save the redhead's life, but this time it was as a return for the fact that he had stolen his things. Harang left immediately. Watching Harang's back leave, Red Hair began to ponder. If he was not mistaken, the move Harang used earlier was exactly the martial art of a great character in this world named Lirung. As far as he knows, Lirung has never accepted any disciples, so why does Harang know those moves? He must attract Harang. Harang led everyone deep inside the ruins. He was just following his intuition. There really isn't any information about that millennial herb. At this time the red-haired guy continued to appear. He asked Harang to answer only one question correctly and then he would leave immediately. But Harang did not know who Lirung was. This made Wu Ming gasp in surprise because everyone in this kingdom knew that name. Looking at Harang's expression, it didn't look like he was lying, so the redhead ignored it and gave them some information about the 1,000-year-old herb. The place where they were standing was a tribe that possessed thousands of years of spiritual herbs. However, they made a mistake when they saved a general from the outside and brought them back to the tribe for treatment. Originally, he would have died if he hadn't used spiritual herbs for 1,000 years, but the man whose greed arose caused the general to kill all the people of the village. Meanwhile, King Norhan has received news of Asul's defeat. He finds it very interesting to personally go and see what kind of person Harang is. Wu Ming on the way asked Harang what would Harang do after he had spiritual herbs for 1,000 years. If you put the quest aside, Harang can absorb the power of the 1,000-year-old spirit grass, making it stronger. Harang had never thought about it, so he didn't know what to do. Wu Ming sighed. Indeed, Harang was sometimes too naive. It was also because of this naivety and not being greedy for material things that the princess trusted him. Not everyone is assigned such an important responsibility. The barbarian girl discovered something and ran away. Harang also hurriedly followed the girl, leading him to a giant tree. Around here there were many dead bodies, but it gave Harang a very familiar feeling. He didn't care and headed straight for that tree trunk. Suddenly, an arrow flew out. Harang recognized it and quickly dodged to the side. This arrow also has poison. Harang shouted to remind Wu Ming and the barbarian girl to be careful. He looked around this place. There were many places where arrows could be fired. He didn't know where the arrow came from. Instead of fighting an invisible enemy, his priority was the millennial spirit herb. Harang ignored the arrow and rushed towards the tree he cut at the corpse hanging on it. From within the skeleton, a tree stump emitted a strong light that startled Wu Ming. This abundant spiritual energy must have been a 1,000-year-old spiritual herb. Harang tasked Wu Ming with taking care of the arrows and Wu Ming going to collect spiritual herbs. Wu Ming suddenly saw a figure above the tree. Could this be the mad general that the thief mentioned? He jumped down to attack Harang. He was still able to block. Harang suddenly realized that when fighting with this guy, the arrows stopped moving. Harang concentrated as much as he could and saw that his hands had strings that controlled arrows. The trick was nothing special at all. Harang rushed to cut off the general's hat and was surprised when there was a baby inside. This boy only wears big clothes to scare others, but he is actually very small. It was because he had to wear such bulky clothes that his movements became strange. He angrily shouted to chase them all out of this sacred land. Wu Ming doesn't care. After obtaining the 1,000-year-old spirit grass will go immediately. Of course, the boy wouldn't allow them to take it even after Harang had made a plea. Only now Mandy spoke in her own language. The other boy also understood the barbarian language after hearing the girl beg the boy to agree to let them take it. Introduce yourself as Amon from another tribe, not Mandy. Amon believes that those who come here are all the same, wishing for an eternal life while death is a boon of the body. The grace to leave this miserable life and go to another, more beautiful world. Wu Ming didn't listen to Amon say that all he needed was that flower. Without this, it would be Princess Yuda who would be in trouble. At this moment, the group of kings Norhan came here, startling Harang. He could catch them from a great distance. Norhan laughed and praised them for doing a good job. He had been hunting for herbs for thousands of years without finding any trace of it. Norhan rushed to punch Amon and take away. Harang was about to speak, but Wu Ming stopped him. The boy spoke up to remind Norhan of his promise. They had completed the task he gave him, now he should also fulfill his promise. Norhan burst out laughing at the promise. Of course he would make an alliance with the princess after he died. Norhan left, leaving behind his henchmen to kill Harang's group. They rushed to attack him, including a very large man. He was so strong that Harang couldn't damage him no matter how he slashed. The Norhan took Amon away, and only now did Harang really understand the purpose of the mission. The flower on that tree is not a 1,000-year-old spiritual herb, but that Amon boy is a 1,000-year-old spiritual herb. That's why Harang's mission asked him to save Amon. Harang was very confused with the actions of these guys. Amon is just a kid. Isn't a child's life important? The big guy doesn't care to be born weak is his mistake. The weak make food for the strong is the law of nature. This made Harang suddenly remember his tragic past. He angrily rushed to attack him. He was still okay. Harang madly slashed many more times and was beaten with blood in his mouth. Meanwhile, Wu Ming also held up his sword to defend himself. He looked for an opportunity to cut the opponent without doing any damage. While in danger, the girl Mandy rushed to save Wu Ming. The little girl glanced at Wu Ming with disdain, making him a little angry. Have I been scorned by a Mandy for being weak? Wu Ming regained his spirit to continue fighting. The big guy advised Harang to give up. He was very interested in the techniques Harang used. He introduces himself as Tanji the Iron Man and invites him to join Norhan. Harang laughed and immediately refused. Just looking at their weak, oppressive faces made him nauseous. Harang rushed with his death-fighting skill and slashed Tanji in the stomach. How the hell he still couldn't make Harang pale. At this point, you still can't cut him. How do you win? He would die. Turned around and saw Wu Ming also fighting despite his face being bruised. Wu Ming shouted, reminding Harang to stay calm. Harang gripped his sword tightly, remembering what had happened. He had been through countless dangers and this time he too would make it through. Harang fully focused on the next attack. He rushed to cut Tanji's body. He was very confused with Harang's actions that clearly didn't work. Why are you still trying so hard? Of course, Harang had a plan in mind. He didn't cut indiscriminately, but only aimed at one point. Only now did Tanji turn pale. His indestructible body received a finishing blow from Harang and he collapsed unconscious. Harang successfully defeated him. On the other side, the barbarian girl and Wu Ming also defeated her brothers. Wu Ming thought that he should go back only when he saw Norhan like that. Even more persuasion would not gain anything. The Tanji who was still not dead Wu Ming took his sword and went to deal with him, but Harang stopped him. There's no need to take his life, he's already lost the ability to fight. Wu Ming retracted his sword, reminding Harang that many people died at the mercy of the enemy. Together they left the ruins on the way to Harang and told Wu Ming how to make 1,000-year-old herbs. Just sow the seed inside Amon so that it could absorb nutrients from the boy. But Harang couldn't accept that after all, Amon was a human being. Wu Ming wanted to go back but Harang hesitated, which made Wu Ming angry and shouted at him. What the hell was Harang going to do with just 3 people? Just at this moment the red-haired thief appeared again. Harang has noticed this guy since last time and he always shows up after each of his fights. He saved you last time so there must be no malice, so Harang has a request to ask for his help. Meanwhile, Amon woke up in the area named Norhan. He immediately stuffed the seed of the elixir into his mouth and swallowed it. Now he just had to wait until it sprouted again and he happily left, and Amon was extremely helpless and didn't know what to do now. Harang's group followed the red-haired thief who broke into Norhan's territory. Wu Ming is very afraid that their mission will be completed after all. So let's go back, don't die. Harang and the others don't care about this, he will do it to the end. Because it was Norhan who opened the door first. There are many guards in his area, but the thief can still lead them to break in easily. Meanwhile in Danyan under Yuta's orders, Mr. Sun built a separate place for the Mandi people. Now there's no need to worry about conflict, thanks to the Naring girls' tribe accepting their request to help. Yuta was worried about Harang and didn't know what was going on over there. She heard that Norhan has a very erratic personality, and Sun advised her not to worry too much. They also worried a few days ago and worrying more won't solve the problem. Just pray that Harang can complete the task well. If they could ally with Norhan then it would be much easier. The Zod couldn't bring troops here to attack them, just like that they would have enough time to spread the word to the whole kingdom. The last royal princess Yuta is still alive and well. Although Zod ruled the kingdom with his brutal policies, Mr. Sun believes that there are many people who are trying to overthrow his rule. If they knew that Princess Yuta was still alive, they would definitely gather here. Until then they would have enough force to declare war on Zod. Mr. Ahaso told them the personality of that Norhan. The letter was only a formality, that's why he advised Yuta to come see him, everyone with martial arts. Meanwhile, thief Wang Juji led our group to the spiritual herb temple. They followed the cliff to approach the temple, now just need to pass the guards to save Amon. Why the hell suddenly the thief coughed and accidentally pushed Harang outside for the soldiers to find out. Discovered by the guards and unable to let them call for help, Harang rushed to attack them. His speed was too fast for them to react. Harang cut down all the guards but forgot that one was imprisoned and far away. Fortunately, Wu Ming got around behind him and killed him instantly. Wu Ming angrily turned to scold the thief, obviously he did it on purpose. Harang stopping Wu from reaching this level didn't do any good to blame him, besides, he's already gone. They had to prioritize saving Amon first. Amon saw Harang's group coming to save him and was so moved that he almost cried. Saved people, and then they had to go quickly before anyone else noticed. Suddenly Norhan noticed and rushed to attack Harang. Harang quickly drew his sword to fight him. He killed Asul and Tanji and he acknowledged Harang's strength. Now he will send your head back to Princess Yuta. They rushed to attack each other. The thief spoke again to stop. Immediately Norhan also stopped but showed his respect. It turned out that this thief was Norhan, and the one who was fighting with Harang was Wu Moon, the elder of Norha. Norhan signaled him to stop but Wu Moon didn't care. He had been searching for thousands of years of herbs to cure him for a long time. Now that it's right in front of you, you can't give up so easily. So Norhan had to make a condition for them to duel. Just rush in and fight, if whoever falls first loses and must obey the orders of the winner. Wu Moon was very confident in his ability and rushed to attack Harang, while Norhan and Wu Ming stood aside from commenting. Wu Moon is a person who has fought too many battles and Wu Ming is afraid that Harang cannot win. And Norhan thinks differently. This battle is that only someone smarter can win. Norhan's assessment is in the most realistic perspective. The two sides balance each other. Elder Wu Moon has fought for many years. His martial arts and physical abilities have both reached the maximum. As for Harang, Wu Ming, no matter how he looked at it, he was at a disadvantage. Norhan knows that, but a battle to determine the winner is not made by what appears on the outside. Take less enemies more, take weak enemies strong in combat, it's called tactics. Norhan bets on who is smarter in this match. Harang struggled to fend off Wu Moon's attacks. He's large, but he doesn't show any weakness, nor is he the type of destroyer in the game. His speed was too fast to teleport behind Harang. He dodged, but he kept chasing, so Harang didn't have time to think. His fighting style and skills were completely beyond his ability. If he bit his teeth to block it, his body wouldn't be able to withstand it. Overloaded Harang suddenly realized a problem. What if he could bring Wu Moon's body to the limit? At that time, he will definitely reveal a lot of loopholes. So Harang kept running around Wu Moon, which angered him. Running like a mouse has no martial spirit at all. Harang didn't care and kept running, so Wu Moon decided to destroy the whole place to see where he ran. At this moment, Harang returned to use his skill to slash Wu Moon's leg once. He burst out laughing and it didn't help at all. Norhan also felt the same because Wu Moon's body was forged even harder than Tanji's. How the hell did Wu Moon suddenly fall down, making Norhan shiver? Harang pushed Wu Moon's legs to the limit and aimed at his joints. Now that he was the victor, Norhan was glad. It had been a while since he felt this joy when Liren left. Wu Ming was bewildered and still didn't know how Harang won, so he was clearly at a disadvantage just now. Norhan immediately explained to the boy, as he said from the beginning of this battle, who is smarter will win. Harang was very wise to force Wu Moon's legs to the limit while constantly chasing him. Until then, all you need to do is hit the joints of his legs with that huge body. His legs could not support anymore. Wu Moon did not give up and continued to stand up to fight Harang again when Norhan glared at him. He angrily turned his head to leave, at which point Amon clutched his stomach and cried out in pain. Harang worriedly ran over to see the boy. Norhan thought that the roots of the millennial herb seed had already grown inside the boy. Soon it will die for the plant to absorb nutrients. Harang asked Norhan to help me save this kid. This makes it very difficult for Norhan to understand that the rules of the game clearly state that the winner will be asked to do one thing. But Harang ignored such good conditions to ally with Thatch Sun to save a boy he did not know. Harang sneered at the reason why a life was dying before his eyes. He couldn't ignore Norhan's confusion with Harang's thinking. He accepted his request to save Amon. Wu Ming was also very surprised that Norhan would pass up such a chance to survive. 1,000 years of spiritual grass is in front of him. Norhan laughed no more because he already had one in his body. Norhan told them about the old story, the day he was saved by a man named Su from Amon's tribe. She gave him a flower of reishi. It certainly saved his life, but because of that, disaster came to Su. After he ate the reishi, Su also disappeared from there, so Norhan went to that temple and discovered Su was being held here. The people of the tribe arrested the Su brothers and forced her to hand over the place where the spirit herb was hidden. Of course, Su couldn't say that she gave it to others, so she was beaten by them. Norhan witnessed all these scenes and angrily jumped out to suppress them. This white light is the power after eating the millennial spirit grass. They also realized this cannot let an outsider have that power. They rushed to attack Norhan, but all were defeated by his hand. This makes them pale because the warriors here have all eaten one flower and yet they died so easily at Norhan's hands. He approached the leader by the neck and forced him to bring Su back to his original state. However, it was too late and the root had reached the root of Su. The flower that had bloomed Su was also dead. Angry Norhan kills everyone here. Hearing this story made Harang's group realize that the general he told was himself. Moreover, the people in the tribe killed each other, not outsiders. In order to protect, Norhan took all his mistakes and told the truth to protect the rest. Hearing this story made Amon also bow his head, ashamed of what his tribe had done. Harang thanked Norhan for helping her. Norhan suddenly decided to go see the princess himself. There's no reason why a person who needs my help is right in front of him. He won't let his life become meaningless anymore. Harang had completed the third quest. The skill he received this time was hidden magic. At Danyan, Mr. Sun rushed to press the princess. The Harang group succeeded in bringing the head of Thatch Sun here to ally with them. The princess and Norhan sat down at the negotiating table. Yuda asked for a relationship within 5 years, but when it came to the benefits for Thatch Sun, she was speechless. Yuda thinks that Norhan should ally with her, because without her royal family, Thatch Sun cannot stand as well. The court now wants to control that area sooner or later. Norhan immediately responded to Yuda's opponent, now not only King Zod, but also at least 5 lords around the kingdom. Not only 5, but this time there will definitely be many more people emerging. Although Yuda has the status of the royal family, there is not a single soldier in his hand. Norhan didn't want to put himself in such a dangerous situation. Norhan said nothing wrong. He was about to get up to leave when Yuda spoke up. The Zod is trying to run the kingdom according to the brutal policy he outlined. The 5 lords have all submitted to him, and she is sure the next place he aims will be Thatch's son. Maybe Norhan will be okay, but will he be able to protect his people? Maybe he will fight with her now. It will lose many people. But if they win, the people of the next generation of Thatch's son will be free. Norhan laughed and walked over to Yuda, looking like she would be a good leader. He agreed to Yuda's request that the self-governing land of Thatch's son would stand on the same front with her from now on. After successful negotiations, they held a party to celebrate. Harang was not used to these things, so he went out to sit. Norhan also followed him and advised Harang to come in and interact with people. At this time, he mentioned the person named Lirung. During the first fight, Lirung asked Norhan how he wanted to die. Not that Lirung killed, but after that, Norhan realized. Every time he uses his white light skill, his lifespan is reduced. Norhan left to meet Harang at the front line. 1 month after the alliance with Thatch's son, their base is much stronger, but it is still not enough to confront the other Zod. They needed to find other generals to ask for their help. This is very difficult because everyone is afraid that the other Zod is targeting them. Mr. Sun thinks they should be forced to join his side, but Yuda refuses. She will not follow the brutal policy of the other Zod. At this time Ahso spoke up about her father's 3 sacred items. If there was such a thing, at least the generals wouldn't be disdainful towards Yuda. However, that thing even Zod is craving for it. If he hasn't found it yet, she knows where to find it. Ahso then reminded Yuda that her father was sure he would hide it somewhere so Yuda could find it. At this time, the guards ran in to announce that the training school was ready. Mr. Sun left Princess Yuda and reminded him to bring Harang with him. He was still holding a bottle of medicine given to him by Yuda. She thought he had really lost his memory and gave him a vial of brain muscle active blood. Just then the main quest came again. This time Harang had to go to Iron City. Mr. Sun ran in and asked Harang if he had free time to go hunting with him. Harang and Mr. Sun went to review the selection of soldiers. There are 2 types of soldiers commonly found in the army. The first type wants to show their strong ability to rise higher, while the second type is weaker than the first type, but they obey the orders of the commander. Just by gathering such people, they will have a powerful army. Suddenly a girl entered the selection with only 1 slash. She cut several logs at a time. Introducing herself as the daughter of the blacksmith Danya, Salida comes here to meet the princess. This time she came here to tell Yuda about the whereabouts of the Spring Dragon sword, one of the 3 royal treasures. But her family forged that sword is in the hands of General Kazan in Unshan Iron City. That night, lying in Harang's room, he still did not understand the details of this mission. The place he has to go is Iron City, but this mission is divided into 3 parts. He remembered a quest in the game. I don't know if it's the same, but I don't care anymore, just ask them to come along tomorrow. The next day, when going to the harbor, Princess Yuda refused to let Harang go. This time the task was not like delivering the mail, it was much more dangerous. They did not want Harang to be in danger. Moreover, they also summoned more experienced people to carry out this task. An excellent warrior Namwu and a very good rookie Haro. Harang was a little freaked out by this decision. How could he? If he insisted on following them, he would be suspected of going along with Yuda's will. Harang was about to return to the Night Eye when suddenly Salida spoke. She wanted to let Harang go with her because if she was Yuda, she will send people with strong martial arts along to increase the chances of completing the mission. Yuda repeated once again that it was dangerous, but Harang did not hesitate to accept the task. Before leaving, Yuda reminded everyone again. This time they just need to go to Iron City to find a chance to steal the sword back. Because Tiet Tan also did not welcome them, if discovered, it would be very dangerous. On the way, Salida noticed Harang's sword and asked to have a look. Looking at this sword made from very rare iron, not every blacksmith can forge such a good sword. Salida was startled to see the engraving on the sword, but this sword was also made by her father's hand. The princess who entrusted Harang with this precious sword proves her trust. There are still 4 days to go before reaching Thiet Tan. Namwu reminds everyone to take a breather first. An Iron City named Kazan is carrying out some dark plan. The soldiers came in to announce that the person had arrived. That person here is Akka after he was defeated by Harang and lost his night eye. He had nowhere to go when he was called here by Kazan. As soon as Akka entered the room, Kazan grabbed his face. Kazan thought he was just a defeated dog abandoned by Zod. It wouldn't matter if he killed him now, but he didn't want to kill Akka so easily. He pulled out a special potion of meteorite, drank this and lived. He would spare Akka. Meanwhile, after 4 days, the Harang group had also reached the Iron City. They were about to enter, but Salida stopped. Tiet Tan has a rule that prohibits bringing weapons inside. They have to find a way to hide the weapons first. There are 2 basic ways. The first is to attach it to the paddle and then put it in the water. The second is to give a good diver to follow the boat. However, the second way was too risky. Suddenly Jiro said he would take care of these weapons. Together they entered the checkpoint, Namwoo blabbing his lips to bribe the guard to get through quickly. This guy is also a money-hungry guy who takes money too. Just when it was about to be settled, one of the 4 generals of Thiet Tan came here. Nong caught sight of this guard checking in and was very angry. Nong asked them to lift the oars for him to check. There was nothing and then he let them leave. Jiro did a very good job of diving for a long time without any problem. And at the port of Nong, he killed the soldier who received the bribe and then sent someone to chase Harang's group. He realized that Salida looked very familiar. That night everyone rented an inn to rest. Salida asked permission to leave first, lying in the bath relaxing without knowing that an assassin was targeting her. Something fell into the water, making Salida realize someone was on her head, and she immediately jumped out of the bathtub, grabbed the sword, and threw it at the window. The guy ran away quickly, but at least she asked for some of his blood. The next morning, while washing his face, Harang was very confused. He was already in Iron City and still had not completed the task. There should have been some nice announcement so he knew how to do it. Right now, the new quest message appears. It has 3 parts. All Harang has completed the first part. Next he needed to find the Iron Lady. Harang didn't know what this was, ran downstairs to find Salida and asked for some more information that she had already left, only reporting back to Namwoo and Jiro. Just appearing and hiding like this makes Namwoo Hung can't trust her, but let them do their own thing first. The group pulled together to find something to eat, but strangely the whole street today was not a single shadow of anyone. After looking for a while, I saw an old man selling dumplings, and Jiro was confused and asked the old man about this problem. He was puzzled that as a person here, he must have known that the city owner Kazan had already launched a war against Princess Yuta. All the boys in the city have been summoned to the army, so there's no one here. The situation is not good. If Kazan really started a war with Princess Yuta, then he must have known that Norhan would go out to support her. Why did he make this decision? Namwoo thinks they need to go back, but Harang stops them. He pointed to the back. There was something they needed to do first. Harang grabbed his stalker by the neck. Meanwhile, Salida finds a place to inform her master of secret information. Harang's group beat the stalker, but he still didn't give any information. Jiro was about to fight again when Harang stopped. He thinks he really doesn't know anything. He only needed one place as to why he followed them. According to Mr. Namwoo, it is possible that the other Nong has noticed them. While Salida was still negotiating with her superiors, she lured the princess's group here as per his request. Salida sat down in a nearby cellar, where her saddest memory was when Nong and Kazan's 4 heavenly kings killed her family right here. If it wasn't for her sister's sacrifice so that she could live, she wouldn't have had the chance to stand here and think of revenge on him at this point. Salida suddenly spotted a stalker. Without thinking much, she threw the sword straight at it to take his life. Since her family died, she has lived with the sole purpose of taking Kazan's head. According to her intelligence, he will be here tonight. Salida's task is to lure the princess's group to come. Use them as bait like Kazan and then take the opportunity to send him off to the afterlife. That night Salida just returned to meet everyone. Just entering the door, Namwoo told her that they were being followed all day by one person. Although I don't know what his reason is for pursuing a bunch of merchants like this. Salida already had her reasons. She assumed that Kazan was haunted by the swords from her house. Although she has been away from her hometown for a long time, there are still people who recognize her. The Kazan sent them to find information to bring her back, but put that aside for now. Salida tells them that she has received information that the sword is in Kazan's bedroom. They need to take action tonight and get out of here before he finds out. In this Iron City, although the name Kazan holds all control, there are not many people who hate him. Due to his constant increase in iron tax but also the brutal actions of his soldiers, so as long as she has money, she can buy any information about him. This information was obtained from a servant working in Kazan's castle, so the accuracy is very high. This reason was enough to bypass Harang's group and make them agree to follow Salida. The group pulled together to enter the back entrance of Kazan's castle. There are guards here who need to pass them to get in. Jiro wanted to go up, but Namwoo Hung stopped them. It would be better if they waited until they changed shifts. Because if they find out that there is a shortage of numbers, then it will be very troublesome. However, after waiting for a long time, they did not change, only saw patrols hovering around this area. So they decided to rush forward to deal with one person each, and were preparing to move when they turned around and saw that Salida had disappeared. The girl who played the beauty trick pretended to be robbed and ran to beg them for help. Then when they didn't understand the problem, she cut them all to death. After finishing the work, the group ran back to Mr. Namwoo to blame Salida for acting too dangerously. Oh, she didn't really care what she just did to preserve their strength. There is a soldier who is still not dead. Salida directly kills him, always surprising Harang. Salida looked at him, reminding him that this was not the time to feel sorry for him. Together they entered the castle. Harang still did not understand how Salida could do such a cruel act. Her eyes just now were filled with murderous intent. They had reached the gate behind the castle's entrance, which was different from the heavily guarded area just now. Even if they could get past them, the guards inside would cause trouble for them, so Namwoo and Jiro took on the task of distracting. They promised to meet again at the cottage after completing the mission. Namwoo and Jiro charged at the guards. They let them blow the whistle to signal their teammates, pulling as many out here as possible to create space for Harang and Salida to break in. When they reached the place, Namwoo brother motioned for Jiro to run away together. Their mission is only to attract them. Among these soldiers, there was a pretty smart guy. He definitely didn't need any more soldiers but stood at the entrance. Someone else wanted to sneak in anyway. At this point Harang and Salida headed straight for him. Before he could cough anything, Harang knocked him unconscious. They successfully entered Kazan's backyard. His study room was located on the top floor. They needed to get there quickly, but they still had to be careful, not knowing what was waiting for them in this castle. Harang looked around on his quest to find the Iron Maiden. He had expected this room to look like a quest game, but it didn't look like it at all. It was completely different. Salida called Harang to move quickly. On the way she wondered why he didn't kill the guard just now. Harang frankly admits murder is not his style. Of course, if he was the one who killed your entire family, then that would be a completely different story. Salida led Harang to the third-floor corridor. They needed to pass this area to reach the highest place. Harang was a little pale with the things in front of him. According to Salida, these people were shadow warriors. Those whom the Kazan gave him his illusionary magic beast poison, turning these people into warriors who only knew how to kill. Suddenly, the store door slammed shut, blocking their way, and a commander behind ordered these people to rush to attack them. Harang and Salida successfully cooperated to overcome this place. Harang wanted to save them, so he asked Salida how. The only way was to kill them. Overcoming the warriors was a difficult task, but thanks to Harang it became much easier. On the way, Harang asked Salida about the Iron Lady. Only now did he know that Tai Nu was actually the wife of the city owner Tiet Tan. If so, then she must be in this Kazan's castle. They had reached the top floor of the castle. The bedroom of Kazan was here. Remembering his master's words, he arranged for someone here to guide Salida to Kazan's room. According to the sign, the person has a cross scar on his face. Salida needed to signal to that person to know that she was on the same side. Salida took out her flute and started signaling. Harang was a little confused with this action, but Salida also let him know that she was also here. At this time, a servant approached them. This guy has no scar on his face. Salida dragged him to a corner, put a knife to his neck, and threatened to reveal the location of Kazan's bedroom. Frightened, he quickly showed them the way to the room with the red door at the end of the hallway. That was his bedroom. As promised, Salida only knocked him unconscious, but didn't kill him. Together they walked towards the room at the end of the corridor, just opened the door and walked in. Oh, the smell that quickly burned through this room. It was dark inside, but it was enough to tell someone was lying on the bed. Salida immediately walked towards the bed swinging her sword in her hand. Harang saw this and quickly stopped them from coming here to get the Zan long sword, not to kill people. Salida angrily threw Harang away. She pulled out her sword to threaten him, and stopped her once again. She killed him too. She had been waiting for the moment to kill him for too long. However, looking closely, it was not Kazan's name, but her scar-faced assistant. At this time, the name Nong entered. Everything was just a trap he set. Even her intelligence is fake. Kazan is now going to fight the princess, and Nong is here to protect the castle. Angry Salida rushed to attack Nong to avenge her family. She slashed his face once and now she has successfully angered him. Salida fought Nong. She was at a complete disadvantage with his overwhelming strength. Salida's breathing was slowly becoming chaotic. Harang was about to warn him, but Salida warned him first. "This is your match, don't get in the way." Harang was also dumbfounded, but looking at him did not have that intention. Salida continued to attack, but no matter what, the Nong was still standing. He laughed mockingly at the weak Salida, who also thought of revenge. To make the confrontation more fun, he directly killed her captain. Salida froze for a moment, remembering what he had done for her. It was he who saved her life to take revenge on Kazan, but because of this revenge, he died here. She couldn't be defeated. Salida, completely engulfed in hatred, rushed to attack Nong. Harang slowed down and started to jump. Only now did he realize Salida's true purpose. If the name Kazan wasn't here, then the spring dragon sword wouldn't do anything. Salida's purpose was just to drag them here to take revenge. If that was the case, then he didn't have time anymore. He had to quickly find the Iron Maiden and return to save Yuta. Salida was so weak that Harang rushed in. He didn't have time to watch anymore. He rushed to cut the Nong with a shocking speed. The Nong name was also green with fear at this speed he had never faced before. As for Harang against those who use spears, he's already well experienced. Harang used his skills to knock Nong into a corner. He lost consciousness and then Harang called Salida to leave, but she would never listen. The murderer of the whole family is right in front of this. Salida pulled out a knife to prepare to finish him when suddenly a girl entered the room and called out to Salida. Salida stared blankly at the girl in front of her who was actually her older sister. The name Nong got up and called Salida's sister, Lady Theat, making everyone freeze. She became Kazan's wife. Sister told Salida what she went through. Their mother's maternal family is the one who obtained the secret medicine to create the army of ghosts. That's what the Kazan guy aimed to hunt down their whole family. When her mother died, the mystery was also burned. But while following her mother to practice medicine, she had learned all of the secret raps, so even if she burned them, she would still remember them clearly in her mind. On the night the Kazan killed their entire family, he forced her to reveal the whereabouts of the mystery even though she didn't want him to know. But this arrow sounded like a dog. He knew she was hiding Salida in the basement, couldn't let him harm Salida. She agreed to help him make medicine. Since then, the name Kazan married her to make it easier to control, locking her in the castle to help him make that medicine. The two talked so intently that they forgot the name Nong was not dead. He has recovered some of his strength. Harang discovered that he was about to do something, but the other two girls did not react in time. Nong rushed to attack the two sisters, Salida, using his body to support her. After that attack, he also jumped out of the window to hide immediately. Salida sat down and held her sister's hand. She thought it was good that she died because of her sister's death. I urged Salida to quickly leave the soldiers coming here. Salida wanted her sister to come with her, which made her very hesitant. If she leaves, the other Kazan will surely pursue them to the end. However, when she saw Salida's scarred hands, she knew that during the past 10 years Salida had suffered too much misfortune. She also couldn't be weak anymore and accepted to follow Salida. At this moment, Harang had completed the task of rescuing the Iron Lady. They immediately fell from the castle. They all ran away together until now. Salida apologized for lying to him about the treasured sword. She promised to repay him later. Harang was glad he had completed the mission, but he didn't know how to talk to Yuta now. Turning around, Salida's injury is not good at all. I don't know if I can get out or not. Harang asked Verita if she was Kazan's wife. He wanted to know if there is a secret exit in this castle. Unfortunately not, because Verita is always imprisoned, otherwise they would have to go through the Shadow Warriors. Salida picked up her sword and prepared to fight, but her older sister stopped her. She took out a potion that would make them quieter. This is something only Verita has, even Kazan doesn't know about it. Verita opened the perfume potion and the warriors became silent, so that Harang and the others were able to pass them easily without any trouble. However, looking at them like this soulless corpse is still too pitiful. Harang wants to find a way to save them. It's not impossible. Verita knows how to help them return to humans. But the medicinal ingredients to make that potion were very rare, and she couldn't do it right now. However, Verita knows her guilt for making them like this. She promises Harang that as long as he helps her find medicinal herbs, she will make them normal. The two of them ran out of the castle and came here, but there was still no notification of completing the quest. They must have left this area completely. Harang asked Salida to hurry up and find Namwoo and Jiro. They found the two of them in a bad condition. Luckily they were still alive. Harang quickly helped Namwoo up and went first. Suddenly there was a scream. He turned around and saw that Jiro had become different from before. He took his hand with Salida and exclaimed that Harang was an innocent man who was easily fooled. Thanks to Harang, the battle was easier. Harang didn't understand what the heck he was talking about. Jiro didn't even bother to explain because Harang would die right now. Jiro rushed to attack Harang, startling him. This guy's speed was very fast. Luckily Harang still reacted and brushed his sword away. Jiro was also surprised that he was as strong as rumored. He wasn't on Harang's side in the first place. Jiro turned out to be the subordinate of the other Kazan. He rushed to attack Harang continuously. Harang had difficulty resisting his sword. His moves were completely different from what he had known in this world. Seeing that Harang was quite stubborn, Jiro gave a new move. His eyes lit up, making Harang startled. He was pushed to the cliff. Unable to let him gain the upper hand, Harang also used his move to cut Jiro's face. Only now did the two bewilderedly realize that what they had just used was a skill. Harang froze for a few seconds. Could this Jiro be a player sent to this world? The Jiro laughed as it turned out that he wasn't the only player in this world, so this match would be a duel between players. Harang wanted to talk but he didn't care and kept attacking him. Harang used his skill to attack, but this time he knew how to break his move with one of his skills. Pushed to the end, Harang was forced to use his last move. His sword was enveloped by a huge aura that made Jiro's face turn pale as well. Harang slashed at Jiro's face. He couldn't dodge it. He could only block the attack so terrible that the ground was shattered. Harang thought he would die after this move, but he was still alive, but he was so tattered that he couldn't fight anymore. Jiro ran away with his tail and Harang fell unconscious from the side effects of the move. Harang woke up in a dreamy sleep on Verita's sister's bed and ran over to check on him. Harang wondered about the two strangers next to him. This is Salida's comrades after the captain and her did not return on time, so they came to check, only to find that all of them had collapsed and brought them here to recuperate. Harang has always wondered about him since meeting the other Jiro. He was a player, but how did he get into this world? Or was in a similar situation as he thought. The more confused Harang became. Sister Verita came in to announce that Namwoo had regained consciousness. Namwoo blamed himself for not realizing that the person next to him had betrayed him. He asked about the Harang sword to hide Salida's lie, or else he would get angry. The sword was not found and was betrayed by his teammates. This time they failed completely. Namwoo was bored. Harang hurriedly encouraged him as long as they were still alive. He then went to visit the girl Salida, who had a very severe cut by Jiro. Verita-san helped her stop the bleeding, but it's not up to her to make it through. At this time, Harang gave the 9 revival consciousness potion that Yuta gave to Verita. He didn't know if this would work, but as soon as he saw it, Verita jumped up. This thing is extremely rare. With this, Salida could be dead. Harang then asked permission to leave first. He needed to return to help Yuta in this situation. Even if everyone advised him to stay in Harang, he didn't care. Until now, the mission completion message had not been released, so Salida's team girl had to take him to a shortcut. All roads in the city were blocked off. He could only go through these bridges to get out. Of course, if it is called a shortcut, it will return to Danyan faster than the main route. Seeing these bridges made Harang a bit pale. He didn't even want to go to the bridge, but used his newly acquired air skills to hurry. Kazan's warship was about to land in the night eye. The soldiers noticed this and quickly ran to report to the princess. Yuta was so feverish. How the hell did this Kazan go to attack them all of a sudden? Their troops numbered up to 20,000 soldiers. With this number, they can't stand it. They have to immediately ask for help from Thatch Sun. Soldiers of the two sides rushed to fight each other despite their equal strength, but the enemy's commander was one of the 4 generals of Kazan's name. That big guy alone stirred up Yuta's squad. The situation is not good at all if it is left like this. The line is quickly broken, but the Thatch Sun side still has not received any reply. This made Mr. Sun think that Norhan was deliberately ignoring them. Yuta didn't see that. Norhan wasn't that type of person, but they still had to prepare for the worst. Yuta began to ponder whether to retreat or not. Now they just had to defend and wait until Norhan's reinforcements came to save them. Mr. Ahaso also advised her to withdraw. Now the best way is still to defend on the wall. If you want to win against them, you must first live. With such a large number of soldiers, their soldiers are dying meaninglessly. Yuta decided to go out on his own to fight the soldiers. If he continued to wait here, it would be like a prey standing still waiting for them to kill. She must win this battle at all costs. Their line was about to break down with the other general arriving. It was at this time that Yuta came to incite his soldiers to fight with the princess as their honor. The morale of the rising army. Yuta took Mr. Sun down there to direct the army to gradually withdraw. Mr. Sun had just left when the name Kazan showed his face to assassinate her, but Norhan came in time to save her life. Seeing Norhan in the flesh made the Kazan murderous as he longed for the title of his warrior heart. Norhan didn't care to knock Kazan away. Mr. Sun ran back to the princess. Norhan asked her to go back to the castle gate quickly. Here, besides inciting the morale of the soldiers, there she had a lot of work to do. He promised to return safely. Norhan stayed behind to stop Kazan. He laughed, not expecting a dying guy like him to come here to stop him alone like this. Kazan sent the demon warriors to attack Norhan. At this time, one of his 4 Bainacha generals also came here. She brought a Norhan warrior to look at. His body was abnormally large. He decided to play with them a bit. Norhan easily defeated these warriors. However, when he turned around, he saw that Kazan was gone. This is only his trick of the tiger. His target is still Princess Yuta. He had to hurry to Yuta to help her. Norhan wanted to run away, but why did Bainacha let him go so easily? Her mission is to stop him here. She sends the demon warrior she controls to attack him. This guy's body is too big, but his speed is extremely fast, and his attack method is too crazy to directly bite his blade. Norhan hastily pulled out another sword and slashed him away. However, it was still not enough to overcome his steel body. Norhan spat blood in his mouth. He was already sick and had to use this much force, making his body unable to handle the pressure. The warrior rushed to hug Norhan and he sighed. He didn't want to use that strength, but he had no choice. Norhan easily escaped from the first warrior and sent him to the counting board. Bainacha gets angry when he destroys her toy, but she doesn't just have one. She signaled to a legion of warriors to rush forward. At this moment an aboriginal girl appeared. Norhan would not have to fight alone, because she led the barbarians to come here to rescue the war. The barbarian army faced off against an army of demonic warriors that she led them with confidence. Relying on those weak guys who also want to defeat the Mandi, why stay there and dream? Indeed, the barbarian army quickly killed Bainacha's shadow army. Norha put a knife to her neck threateningly. Now that there was nothing to cover her, she was still fearless. She has a secret, so they don't dare to kill her. To get more information about the name Kazan, Norhan did not kill her in a hurry, but only tied her up. Bainacha was so talkative that Bibi had to say she was called a talkative old woman. Norhan observed closely that although these barbarians looked terrible, the truth was that they were here to help the princess. I don't want to stay in this battle anymore. I give this place to Bibi girl, and I will go to help the princess. While Princess Yuta was still looking at everything, she herself did not expect the Mandi people to come here to help them. With that number of the barbarians, they will greatly reduce their casualties. Right now the name Kazan appeared. He thought it was too early for the princess to be this happy. Sun was about to rush forward, but Yuta stopped her, wanting to clarify why he wanted to kill her. Kazan laughed out loud why Yuta's head would pave the way for his advancement. His army lost to Yuta, advised him to surrender and swore allegiance to her. Kazan doesn't care that only the strong are worthy of his service. At this time, Kazan tells Yuta a truth. The killer of her father is not Zod but the holy sword Lirung. Sun didn't believe it because the sword saint had already sworn allegiance to the king. Kazan rushed to attack the princess. At this time Harang returned in time. Kazan's army lost on all fronts. There was no chance for him anymore. As a smart man, he chose to surrender to keep this life. At least he still has value to take advantage of, so the princess did not kill him, but asked Mr. Sun to send him to prison. The owner of the city was arrested. Tiet Tan also fell. However, there were still many of his subordinates that did not participate in this war. They would come here anyway. Yuta ordered the soldiers to add more guards. And now she will have to go meet the Mandi people who helped her. Bibi girl introduced each person to Yuta in turn. The old man next to him was the elder Orich and the giant was Nahan. With all due respect, Yuta thanked them for helping him this time. Bibi girl followed the elder's instructions and came here. Mr. Orich was a sorcerer who could hear oracles from the gods, and the gods wanted them to come here to guide the spirits. Even though she didn't understand anything, Yuta still had to smile. She would prepare a comfortable place for them to rest. Norhan asked about the demon army, and Bibi had his subordinates wipe them out. This made Harang a bit sad. If only he had that medicine he could have saved them. Mr. Orich suddenly spoke up and pointed at Harang, calling him a soul to lead. This made Harang not understand what the hell. Even Mr. Orich did not explain and left. That night in Harang's room began to think. He hadn't told Yuta about the sword and Jiro. Including the quest thing, he had no instructions to return here. Harang wondered if he would have to return to Iron City to get the quest. Suddenly the girl Bibi broke into his room. Bibi didn't go on long, but always asked Harang about the mission. Bibi is happy to have finally found her kind. She is also a player like Harang and is happy to cooperate with him. At first glance, Bibi didn't have any malice at all, so Harang asked Bibi for more information. The number of questions that Harang needs to answer is so much that Bibi is also a bit pale. She doesn't know where to explain from. She is just like Harang. While playing the game, I got caught up in this world and couldn't log out. Bibi also has to do the task. After meeting the elder Orich, he immediately realized that Bibi was from another world. She heard a legend from Mr. Orich that, when the world loses its balance, 3 spirits will follow the call of the gods to come and protect us. Bibi thinks that those 3 souls are the players. Bibi is one, Harang is 2, and the other one she doesn't know. At this time, Harang told Bibi the last person's identity. She was startled when she heard that Jiro attacked Harang again. Harang also didn't know what mission Jiro was on, but their goals were completely different. Bibi thought that the 3 of them all had the same goal. Harang's mission is to collect 7 pieces of stone to return and protect Yuta. Bibi's mission is to collect 7 pieces of ring and lead the Mandi tribe with the empire. Meeting people in the real world made Harang not even know how to regulate her emotions. They cooperate with each other from now on. Meanwhile, Yuta goes to the prison to meet the name Kazan. She wants to know everything from him. Kazan is still very firm with his words. It was Lirung who killed her father, that's all. Yuta still couldn't believe it because Lirung was the closest person to her father. He couldn't do such things. However, the name Kazan asked the princess if she had seen Lirung's face. If he hadn't seen it, what purpose did he do? How could she know? Next, the treasured sword named Kazan laughed and criticized Yuta's lie but couldn't detect it. Knowing that she was tricked, Yuta immediately went to ask Harang, while Solita had just woken up and had to leave immediately. Yuta went to the room to look for Harang, but he was nowhere to be found. At this point, Harang was going with Bibi to meet the elder Orich. There were too many things he didn't understand and wanted him to explain. Bibi happily took Harang to meet the elder. He guessed that Bibi did not understand why he knew that the 2 of them were from another world. Seeing that the old man was silent, Harang was confused and asked Bibi. Bibi signaled to Harang to be quiet when he wanted to answer immediately. Mr. Orich woke up to tell Harang that he simply knew. Harang stammered to tell the story that he met the 3rd player here. He did not understand what is soul leading and wanted Orich to clarify. He motioned for the 2 to approach with their backs turned. He couldn't explain, they could only find the answer on their own. Harang enters another dimension where he meets the holy sword Lirung. Harang believes that it was Lirung who pulled his soul here, but not what drew Harang's soul here were the king's treasures. Harang still didn't quite understand, wanted him to explain better. Since the beginning of the country, there have been 3 king's treasures enchanted on it. The person chosen by the 3 treasures will become a true king. Charms are activated when the king dies and the treasures will find new owners. As usual, those treasures would be passed on to the heir, and the king died before doing so. That's why the spell activates, pulling 3 souls from another world here to help the next king. The enchantment only stops until one person has gathered all 3 treasures. However, the 3 treasures are separated. That's why each person has a different task, supporting a different person to become the king. Lirung tells Harang that he is just a wandering soul. When he completes all the tasks, the charm maker will answer the rest of the questions for him. Harang and Bibi woke up. They turned to look at each other. At this time Mr. Sun ran to find him and brought him back to meet Yuta. Yuta wanted to know all the things Harang was hiding. After being discovered by the princess, Harang couldn't hide it anymore and confessed everything. Yuta feels very sorry for them just because her hasty decision put them in danger. Mr. Sun turned to ask the princess about what Kazan said. Could it be that Lirung is a traitor to the royal family? Hearing the name Lirung startled Harang and asked the princess to tell more about this person. For Yuta, Lirung is like her older brother. He was always a trustworthy person, but on the day his father passed away, he also disappeared. There were rumors that it was Lirung who betrayed, but Yuta didn't believe it. In fact, only Zod and Lirung who witnessed the incident that day knew. After meeting the princess, Harang returned to her room. Bibi was already waiting there to discuss more. Harang is very worried if Bibi's mission is against hers. For his mission, protecting the princess was the primary goal. Bibi laughed. The owner of the precious ring was King Ayul. His wish before he died was to strengthen the solidarity between the kingdom and the Mandi people. Therefore, Bibi will make Princess Yuda king to perform this task. Their methods are different, but the goal is the same. 2 treasures are already here and the other treasure is Zan Long sword. Jiro will definitely receive the quest from the owner of that sword. The owner of the 2 treasures ring and ring are already dead. Then it is very likely that the owner of the Zan Long sword will be the same. Harang's speculation was wrong when the owner of the Zan Long sword was Zod. He was not dead, but directly entrusted the task to the Jiro. Harang and Bibi were at the riverbank when someone came to announce. Salida has come all the way here to apologize to the princess, having betrayed her once, so of course the princess can't trust Salida anymore. At this time, Harang entered hoping that Yuda would respect her face and forgive Salida. Anyway, she did not have any malice towards them. Once again Salida owes Harang a favor. She promises to repay him as long as Harang opens his mouth. Harang tells Salida that Kazan is locked in a prison. Salida is not in a hurry to take revenge. 10 years is not too late. Her priority now is how to repay Harang first. Salida and Bibi met just recently, but the two have become close. Right now the task board of the two appears. They find a corner to discuss the mission. This time the 2 people's mission is the same. They both have to go to the land of the Namwal Aborigines. Harang's mission has 3 parts and Bibi's only 2 parts. Their destination was in the same place, but when they got there, they split up and went in the same direction, but it's okay to be in the same area. Then Harang went back to tell the princess. Yuda didn't want to let Harang go at all. Aboriginal land was the tiger's den, and besides, he was also a native of Namwal. Even this woman who always wanted peace wouldn't dare enter that area. Harang encourages Yuda, it's okay if you go with Bibi. She is also an aboriginal that is not aggressive. Moreover, if you go there and can make an alliance with the natives of that area, they will become even stronger. Yuda tells Harang about the old days when the kingdom clashed with the Aborigines. The ruler of the kingdom was Lirung, who confronted 17 Aboriginal tribes. In the end, Lirung still won, but the Aborigines had a great feud with the kingdom, which is where Harang was going to Namwal. She still hopes Harang will not go but face Bibi's determination and encouragement. Yuda still had to agree. At this time the Wooming boy ran out begging to be accompanied. He had been training very hard just waiting for this day. The group set off together. Suddenly, someone rushed out in the bushes, but it was the Puya Aboriginal girl from before. Bibi looked and smiled. This group will be very happy. The group went together into the land of the Aborigines. Wooming exclaimed that there was no such dry land in the kingdom. Everywhere I go, I see only one scene. Harang signaled everyone to stop and rest. Suddenly Puya girl ran over. She already spoke their language and asked them to follow her. In the distance Harang discovered a column of smoke, so just going there, they reached the Aboriginal village. In front of them was a narrow path between 2 cliffs, quite dangerous, but Wooming still decided to go ahead to scout. The group followed the boy who suddenly had a sword rushing towards them. A large girl stood in the way of the group. She immediately recognized them as people of the kingdom. Including Bibi and Nahan, she thought they were traitors and kicked them out. Even if Harang spoke up to explain that they came here without malicious intent, she didn't care. Mr. Nahan bent down to say something to Bibi. Immediately Bibi approached the Aboriginal girl and challenged her to a duel. If Bibi wins, then she has to let them enter the village. Aboriginal people often resolve conflicts by a duel with each other. The Aboriginal girl accepts Bibi's request to introduce herself as a Namwal warrior named Koyo. If Bibi wins, she will